Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It is March 24th, 2022, and we are at the final tail end of a 2-day epic 5-part Mormon Stories series with Steven Pynakker,
hey,
host of Mormon Book Reviews podcast and YouTube channel, knows more about Mormonism than 99.9% of Mormons, and is a good-hearted guy and just a good friend, dear friend. So we're thrilled with the first 4 episodes we've had. If you haven't checked them out, pause, go back to part 1 where we talk about Steven's childhood and adolescence and young adulthood, growing up as a charismatic Christian in Chicagoland area, and what got him interested in Mormonism. And that was part 1. It was really powerful and interesting. Part 2 was an outsider's view of how the Book of Mormon was created. Steven weighs in on that. It's like 3 hours. It was really, really good. Part 3 was Steven talking about all the things that he loves about Mormonism and the Book of Mormon from an evangelical, progressive, maybe I would say libertarian Christian perspective. That was part 3. Part 4, he spends a good hour and 15 minutes consulting, offering free consulting advice to the Mormon Church on how to maybe be more successful, but probably definitely be more Christ-like, but with humility. And then part 5, we're finishing up his story. So last we left your story, Steven, you were multi-decades into being a believing Christian, but also following Mormonism. And what you alluded to is that at some point you lost your faith in God and Jesus. Mm-hmm. And you wanted to wait until this final episode to talk about how and why you lost your faith, got to the point where you went from believing charismatic Christian to a self-identified atheist and agnostic, mm-hmm. and other things in your life that may have been wound up in that.
Yeah.
And then fun part will be how Mormon Stories helped rekindle your belief in God and Jesus. Mm-hmm. And then we'll talk about your beliefs and your ministry today. How does that sound?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
You ready?
Yeah, this is the part where it gets personal, and I don't like to talk about my personal life that much, but I felt
too late now.
Yep, I'm here. We're taping this.
I'm joking. And we've got Gerardo with us in studio. Hey, Gerardo.
Hey, John. Hey, Steve.
Thanks for taking off work. You're a full-time employee somewhere else, so you've taken off like 3 days this week, so thank you.
Yeah.
And we've got Jen Camp, who adds wit and brilliance and heart and soul.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jen Camp.
Thank
Good
you.
to have you.
Thanks.
All right, Steven, where do we pick off? Where do we pick up?
Well, do we want to start? I mean, I guess, do we want to start from the very beginning or like?
Yeah. If you want to go back to whatever things you wanted to save for this episode, let's start.
Okay,
there.
and then kind of how it accumulated.
A timeline. Let's follow the timeline.
So I think, so I deliberately held back part of my personal story because this is, I don't really like to talk about myself, and I've had a very difficult life in many ways. Now, I recognize that I have many privileges in my life that are not afforded to other people, but we all kind of have our own cross to bear, and this is kind of mine in one sense, is that, from a very early age, as I had mentioned in the very first episode, people felt that I had a calling on my life, and that I was kind of touched by the Lord, and that I was going to have some maybe like prophetic ministry or a lot of people were thinking that, and that I was maybe going to be a prophet or whatever like that. And so deeply involved in this, deeply spiritual. I thought about Jesus all the time. I was contemplated about, what we can do to save souls and all this kind of stuff. And then probably around second grade, so I was a young boy, I recognized that I was attracted to other boys, right? Now, I didn't even know what homosexuality was, but I just knew that I liked boys. It was kind of intrinsic, right? I was attracted. I wasn't attracted. I mean, there was an older boy that I had a crush on. And so I recognized that there was something different about me that that was different than other people because I was supposed to like girls and I didn't. So I didn't understand what this whole thing was. But then as I'm getting a little bit older, and it didn't take much long to find out what that being gay was, that it was a sin and it was an abomination. And so we have these parallel tracks of, on one hand, I am this super Christian, called of God, but then I also have this other parallel where I'm what we call same-sex attraction or whatever. We've talked about that terminology, Geraldo, that I suffered with, right, as I would have seen at the time, that this is this great horrible sin that was in my life, and this is right around the time of AIDS. I was around the same age as Ryan White, who was the kid that had AIDS in Kokomo, Indiana, not too far from where I lived. And there was this big controversy about him going to school. And I didn't really understand AIDS. I didn't know, was he have AIDS because he's gay? If you're gay, does that mean you get AIDS, right? I didn't really understand a lot of things, so I was kind of afraid. So that, and then on top of that, all the horrible things that Christians say about gay people, especially during this period of time, it's pretty horrendous. So I just had a very low view of myself because I recognized that I had feelings that God condemned and that's pure evil. And, it was a very difficult thing to have these realizations. And then living in the country where I like to play soldier, army, and realize, they won't let you in the military, those kind of things. And then part of the reason why I chose to pursue politics as opposed to a ministry was because I'm gay, I couldn't be a minister, I couldn't serve God, so maybe I can serve God in the political realm and do it that way. So I just had this view of myself that I was not worthy to serve God, I couldn't go into a ministry, that I'm this horrible human being, and I'm a monster, and I just hoped, and I prayed to God that he'd take it away. Like my little brother that was 10 years older than me. And I thought, well, maybe when I get his age and he likes girls, maybe I'll like girls by the time I'm his age. I didn't know anything, right? So that's part of my story that I really don't tell anybody. I'm kind of re-entering into the world. I've been was in a dark place for a very long time. And so, that's just kind of the beginning of the story right now. Is there anything you want to ask me as we're continuing right now? Because I wanted to, it's okay.
Did you come out to your parents as a teen or anyone?
Oh, so that was years later. It was years later. So
no, you didn't.
No, I was growing up in high school. So I was the biggest homophobe. I was a self-hating, self-loathing gay person, right?
How would that manifest?
By
your homophobia?
Making jokes and saying cruel things about them. I actually never, ever attacked a gay person or
You mean physically or verbally?
No, I don't think I ever verbally or physically, no, I definitely would never hurt anyone physically, but I never verbally attacked a gay person. Even, I never did that, but I would talk about them in general with my friends, make fun of them, that kind of stuff, make jokes and stuff. So I was pretty virulent in my homophobia.
So that idea that some of the biggest homophobes
Absolutely.
are probably
gay, yeah, no doubt.
You think that's,
there's 90% of the time they probably struggle with that issue. Yeah, I do believe that very firmly because it definitely manifests itself in that way. Before I want to go back a little bit just to give you one sense of how I thought about myself as a child. So in 4th grade, I suffered a burst appendix and I almost died. It was a very serious thing. And by now I know I'm gay. I know this is a horrible, hideous thing. And I'm writhing in pain. I'm on death's door practically. And I'm this young kid who's just it's a very serious condition that I'm having. And the biggest concern I had before they put me under was I was afraid that if they cut me open, they would find out. I imagined that when they cut me open, they were going to find I would be full of maggots. this is like this horrible maggots, because that's what homosexuality would have represented, something very ugly, very dark, very dirty. So I actually was worried as a young boy that when they cut me open, they're going to find out. Imagine having that as a kid, thinking that. And so this is the kind of stuff I had to deal with, So I had to hide this attraction. I couldn't tell anybody about it. Everybody I knew said it was a sin and how much they hated gay people. And I had people, I had family members who say, they should kill gays and that kind of stuff. I had some pretty brutal things that were said about gay people by friends, by family. So I had nobody to talk to, nobody to turn to. So everything was internalized. I was truly alone because I couldn't be myself to anybody. And so I could never express my feelings. I could never just be a human being, So I was very driven to succeed in other areas, whether it be sports or politics, which I was pretty successful at, especially at a young age. I did quite a bit, accomplished quite a bit as a young person. And of course, when I'd get into arguments with Democrats, I'd always say, well, you're the party of gays, and of course I was in a blue collar area. So many of the Democrats, who are probably all now Trump people, I would use that as a trump card against them, if you will. Well, you're the party of gays. You support gays and flag burning. And of course, these are union guys, and they like their guns and they like their flag and they don't like gay people, right? So, and they were Democrats. So I would use that would be like I had no problem using that kind of phraseology in the political realm either, So I was definitely anti-gay in even my political world as well. So yeah, this is
That's so much self-loathing.
Oh boy, a ton of it.
Yeah.
A ton of it. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is one of the reasons why I asked Geraldo to be one of the co-hosts, because, you understood, you understand what I was going through,
Yeah.
You've been through this little hell. It's not a little, it's a hell. It's a hellish place to be. And so I thought, okay, Geraldo's here. This will be good. John, you have experiences in this area. So I thought this is a good place to have that conversation. So I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to just tell another part of my story but I also think that my sexuality is a gift, because I think part of the reason I'm able to do what I'm able to do is because I know, people, we live in a culture war. We have all these culture wars going on. Well, I've had a culture war inside of me since I was a young child. So I'm like, everything that's going on now, it's like, well, welcome to my world. This is the world I grew up in, because I hated myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so that taught me some valuable lessons. And so I think it really helps contribute to me being able to love people in a way and talk to all people from all persuasions in a way that very few people can, without getting upset, without getting angry and argumentative, that I can just have kind, calm conversations with people that I fundamentally disagree with, because I just remind everybody that we're all image bearers and the Lord's been doing a work in my life. So I look at part of this story, all this background, what it was leading up to, is that I had to address my sexuality, because it plays a pivotal role, I think, in this whole endeavor as well, because it helped me become the person that's able to do this kind of thing. And one of the things I think that
I see it as sacred. Like, before sacred meant something different to me in the Mormon church, but you being willing to share your story in such intimate ways with me and us and with our audience.
Yeah.
I view that as sacred. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. And I know, I think most people that have been watching my channel are going to be appreciative of me doing this. I just feel like, even if you don't agree with me being gay, which is kind of funny, right? It's still part of who I am, and it plays an important part. But this is, so I'm in politics.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sure.
So, what did you learn, or what were the messages given to you about what should gay people do with their attractions? Should they
get the demons cast out of them?
Praying it away? Was it a demon? Was it something they were born with, or something they chose, and how those ideas evolved eventually from your childhood to your youth? Because at some point you probably realize, it's definitely not a choice.
within charismatic Christianity.
Right.
So you said demons. Do you want to start there?
Well, that would be one explanation, that these are demons that need to be cast out of you. And we hear stories of this all the time where they try to cast out demons of, LGBTQ people. Even here in America, you hear stories like that. So that's one strain. The other strain is that you chose it. And the other, that God would never make somebody like you, that this is on you. God made you. He made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Well, my name's Steve, by the way, but so he did make me. I don't know what that was, but that whole thing, was very, but also then too is that, within a lot of people equated homosexuality with pedophilia as well. So all the hatred that pedophiles, people have towards pedophiles today, that was the same kind of hatred that a lot of Christians and regular folk had towards gay people too, was that they looked at you as a child molester, right? So you keep your children away from, I had a sister that wouldn't let me be alone with one of my nieces, those kind of things when I came out. So yeah, it's very weird stuff. I even had like a fundamentalist Bible.
But if we're following a timeline, right? Mm-hmm. From your childhood, you're hearing there are demons, but at some point, you probably realized, well, this casting out of demons is not working, right? So, well,
I would have never dared to even admit that I was gay, to tell people that I would have demons cast out of me. But I did think for a while that it was demonic.
Okay.
When I was young, probably 5th, 6th grade, I thought maybe this was like an evil spirit that entered into me.
But you were too afraid to ask to have the demon cast out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'd have to admit you were gay,
right,
to ask for the demon to be cast out.
Right. And I would go to places where you could come up with prayer, and I would say, okay, what do you need prayer for? And the closest thing I could say about it was, well, pornography. Can you pray about that? Hoping that maybe that would cover that area and then it would be cast out of me, and then I could be, heterosexual, right? So that's kind of how I saw it. But I wouldn't even dare mention to anybody that I was gay. It was horrible what would have happened to me at a young age, because I went to Christian schools. I would have been thrown out of those schools. I would have not had any friends, would have been totally ostracized. And so, there was nothing in that world that any tools that I had to deal with this, other than you can go to reparative therapy. I remember seeing brochures for Exodus International everywhere. That it was like, you can change, you can do this. It's we
didn't get close to those ideas.
No, okay. Well, because for a while there, I thought it was because I was evil, right? But then, and this would have been for a long time. But then I did recognize that there is like this thing where you're like, I didn't choose this.
Right.
This is who I am. I know who and what I'm attracted to. So this is intrinsic to me. I recognize that, And
straight people don't choose to be straight. They just are straight.
Yeah. I just remember I really never had any connection to gay people. I had nothing but contempt for them. I didn't like them. And of course, I didn't like myself as a result of that. But I do remember a moment in the late 80s, and I was watching, I think, Nightline, and they were doing the AIDS quilt on where the Washington Monument is, right? And they had the whole AIDS quilt laid out there. And I remember just being struck by it. And I started weeping. And I remember walking up to the television and putting my hand on the television. It was the first time that I felt something like the humanity of those people as well. And it was a recognition, this is a great, horrible thing that's happening. And so my heart melted for them. So it kind of, I just remember it was so unexpected, because I was all I hate them, they're bad, I'm bad, but but I had that moment where something melted, like I felt something, like something came over me, and I went and just laid my hands on my TV just to kind of be in solidarity, and just, so it was, there was this acknowledgement in myself that this is who I am. So I probably was like maybe 14, 15 when that happened,
Was that a change of heart?
Well, I think that it was the first time that I felt any connection to other gay people, right? I felt that connection to them. Whereas before, I just wanted to stay as far. For me, I would stay away, as far as away from gay people as I possibly could, because I had a feeling they might be able to figure out that I was gay. So I didn't want to even be near them. That's how bothered I was by gay people. I didn't want to even get close to them. But then I felt that I felt something when I watched that television program, and kind of gave me like an opening there that made me more aware that they're not all evil. You know, I thought of myself as being really bad, but at least I'm not having sex, right? That's part of where a homophobe would be. Well, you know, maybe you have these feelings, but at least I'm not having sex. You know, you could pass judgment on that way, on them as well that way too. So I don't know. That was just a real powerful moment in my life. But one of the things I recognized, I come from a family of 5, and I had 3 older brothers and sisters, and then there was a 10-year gap, as we'd mentioned before. And then I had a younger sister. Now, when they came up in the 70s and early 80s. By the time they all got married, by the time they were like 19, 20 years old, they all got married young, right? Just like you did. But that in that generation was like the last generation where that was still normal, like even in America where you got married young. And so they all got married young. And I had this recognition probably in high school where I thought, okay, I can keep this under wraps until my younger sister gets married. Because then it's like, why aren't you married? You know, so I just remembered, like, once my sister got engaged, it's like there's a countdown. And I just remember, like, okay, this is kind of like where at some point I'm going to have to come out, because it's going to be obvious that all my other siblings are married. I'm not. I felt like I could get away with it as long as she was not married, because, well, she's single too, and that's fine. But then once she got married, I remember even being at the wedding thinking, well, this is it. Like, people are, at some point, I'm going to have to deal with this and tell people, you know, that.
At what point did you realize that it was not going to change? So it was not you had already, at one point you realized it's not going to change.
Yeah.
It's not a choice. Mm-hmm. And at what point did you realize it's not going to change?
Because I think what it was is that I remember as a kid thinking, well, maybe when I'm my brother's age, like he would have been a teenager at the time, maybe by the time I'm his age, I'll be like him and I'll like girls. And I remember when I was in high school and I was like, that didn't happen. And so that was a realization that this is who I am. This is part of me, and it's not, and I'm not changing. I can't change it.
Oh. I see that as a little bit of an advantage, right? Because a lot of us got a message or like, you can change, and a lot of evangelical Christians would have followed the Exodus International path and conversion therapy and be indoctrinated into the idea that the reason they're gay is because, you know, they became gay by experiences during their life while growing up, and that's something that can be changed through therapy, through a lot of prayer. But it seems like you figured it out, that it was not going to change pretty early on.
Yeah, well, I'm a very inquisitive person. I read everything. Like when I you know how much I plunged myself into Mormonism. Well, I've plunged myself into various subjects that I find, if I find a subject, well, of course, I was very interested in sexuality from a very young age. So whatever I could get my hands on, I would read surreptitiously. We didn't have internet, so libraries, wherever I could read about sexuality, I would try to read as much as I could. I also, of course, read the clobber verses in the Bible, right? And I knew what they said. And I really hated those verses because they were condemning me, right? Yeah. But I remember, just because I was so inquisitive, I remember reading that there's science, there's some science here, there's also psychology, that there's other people who are saying things that I could think, okay, maybe there is something to what they're saying. So I recognized that there might be some truth to that, but the problem is they weren't Christians. So I had to kind of recognize that as well. But I knew that there was another way of viewing sexuality that was different from the scripture. So I kind of knew that it wouldn't work. I never actually seriously thought about going to conversion therapy. But I think if I had told my family when I was younger, they probably would have probably considered doing something like that. Certainly.
Right.
Yeah. And you kind of dodged a bullet, obviously, because I was doing my PhD and, going right at evergreen and reparative therapy when Alan Chambers of Exodus International comes out. This is the head of Exodus International, which is the evergreen equivalent for evangelical Christians, ex-gay reparative therapy kind of organization. And the leader of it admits we never really fixed anybody.
Yeah.
After decades of all that money and time, they're like, oh, just kidding. It never worked for anyone.
No, it didn't. It absolutely. And this is the thing too, is we live in, so we've had two properties, one in Florida for decades and then one of our place in Chicago. Well, our place in Florida is in a Christian community and they host conferences there. And one spring I took some time off and decided I'm going to stay at our place and take a job at the center, just doing some odd jobs, working in the kitchen and also working in the mailroom there. And so while I was there doing work, Exodus International was having a conference there. And I would have to go do the mail round. So I would walk into different conference rooms that might be connected to an office and I would see all these gay men and I just felt so bad for them. And part of me was like, I got to be careful because I don't want them to recognize that I'm gay. But I actually pitied them. I really felt like really bad for them. And I thought so even then, even though I was a hardcore Christian believer, but also recognized that I was gay, I felt bad for them because I just didn't think, it just seemed so pitiful. I just saw them and they all seemed so very, very pitiful. And so I recognized even then, I could see it in their eyes. Actually, I know that when I would walk in the rooms, I could tell some were also checking me out, looking at me. I could sense that they're probably dealing with that while they're doing the conference.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
All right.
Yep.
So where did it go from there?
So I took a job. I was involved in politics for a very long time. I mean, like in my high school years through my early 20s. And I had a job opportunity where I was going to take a job with become the department head of the Weights and Measures department, one of the cities. So I moved into the city and I took the job and it was kind of a political appointment, but basically wherever you'd see scales or gas pumps, you'd have the sticker on there. And then my name would be on that sticker at every gas pump and every, scale in town and everything like that. So I worked in that department and everything like that. Well, I worked at that job for a couple years, heavily involved in politics, doing political consulting as well, knew congressmen and senators on a first name basis, just was pretty well plugged into politics, had a pretty well-paying job for somebody in their young 20s, department head, doing weights and measures. And then
Chicago's known for its politics, by the way.
Yeah. And just so you know, I'm from Northwest Indiana. The Democrat political machine was very much like the Cook County machine in Chicago. It was a political machine.
Is that Dan Quayle territory?
Well, Dan Quayle came up and visited up there quite a bit, but he wasn't from that part of Indiana.
Okay.
But he was good friends. He had a lot of good friends up there. But yeah, and Quayle was a little before my time. I knew people that were friends with him, but I did meet him once. That's right. So, so I was involved in politics, and then this job didn't really work out very well because one of the mayor's assistants had it out for me. He was questioning my loyalty and he was a super paranoid guy. Then they made life miserable for me at work. They basically made me quit. So that's what happened. So then I'm like, okay, Steve, you've done the politics thing. You were pretty good at it, but you need to take a break from the politics. And so I am a book guy. So I went to Borders Bookstore all the time. And in Northwest Indiana, it's culturally a very conservative area, very conservative culturally. And people weren't openly gay. People would get beat up. As a matter of fact, the mayor of the city that I worked at had a reputation. It was when he was a young man, they would beat up gay people when he was a young people in the city. So him and his crew would go and beat up gay people. So that was the mayor. That's the story that I'd heard and I'd heard from some of his friends about that. So that's the kind of hostile environment that I was in, very homophobic. But there was Borders Bookstore was like the cultural center of Northwest Indiana, and it was also the place where all the gay people felt comfortable. And you had a bunch of gay people that worked there, and they were openly gay, and they felt comfortable working there, and it was like, we run the show here, right? That was a safe space. So you had a bunch of gay youth would go there and hang out, so it was a place that gay people felt very comfortable and can be openly expressive with their sexuality, or just be more like themselves because they knew that they were at a place. So that was the only place you could go to that you felt safe. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get a job at Borders because then I can create my own community that can be supportive of me, because I knew the time was coming very quickly that I was going to come out of the closet, because I had to deal with this. So I kind of broke from the politics, and then I thought, okay, now I have to deal with this sexuality, and have to be honest with people. But also I was like, I want to have a boyfriend. I want to experience those kind of things too, that was stolen from me. I couldn't have a first date in high school. I couldn't go through the process that most heterosexual people go through and be able to express yourself and have your first kiss and all that. Of course I kissed girls and went on dates with girls, but that obviously, how did that work for you, right? That wasn't great.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about that, and I've never thought about it that way. Well, probably at some point, but it's a big deal. Like growing up and being in high school and not being able to have the same experiences that just a normal heterosexual peer would have.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. And so you do feel like you've lost this period of your life that you never, so I'm like 24, 25 when I take the job at Borders, but I'm mentally very, when it comes to my sexuality, I'm still a high schooler, right? Because I haven't really gone through all the trials and tribulations of growing up and figuring things out and all that comes with the territory. Yeah. So I'm emotionally a teenager, or still in high school in that regard. So I was just like, I thought, okay, well, I can work here. So I got my job there, but I was Mr. Republican, right winger. But
you're a log cabin Republican.
Well, yeah, I guess you could say, yeah. And this was the fun part. So once I got to work there, I was like, I told everybody right away, oh yeah, I'm gay, or they would come and ask me, or I knew it, I was a regular customer there, so I was recognized by everybody. But yeah, so everybody was like, they were like really embracing and open to me. But I was also still strongly an evangelical Christian, still very conservative in my beliefs and in my faith. And so I was very open about that too, that yes, I am gay, but I'm not a liberal and I'm not an atheist. I am a right-wing, born-again Christian who just happens to be gay. And so, and everybody there, and this was the most interesting dichotomy about Borders there, is that you had a contingent of gay people, large gay people, but you also had a lot of evangelical Christians that worked there as well. So it was this great place where we could intersect with each other. And I was standing in between those two groups because I had feet in both camps, right? So I actually hit it off very well with, I didn't have any lesbian friends. Then all of a sudden I have lesbian friends and hit it off with them. And I got community and friendships with them, and actually didn't really get along with any of the other gay guys there, by the way.
How old were you?
Like I said, I was around 25 when I took the job, 24, 25 when I took the job there. So, but I was more... I'm still more heterosexual in the sense that I'm the guy that goes to the sports bars and hangs out with the guys more so than going to a gay bar. Like I rarely ever would go out to gay bars because that just didn't feel comfortable to me. So I never, and like I said, I didn't really get along too well with a lot of the gay guys that worked there for whatever reason. But I made friends, and then that was the place where I was able to come out to people and then feel comfortable and tell my story. And then that was the place where I decided that then, now that I have this place, then I can use that as the time and place to start telling my family and friends about coming out. Because I felt like it was important that I do that.
How did it go?
So I just remember...
Around what year is this?
This would have been probably around 99.
Okay.
So I remember...
this is going to sound weird, but that's still before it was cool. I mean, you could say it's not cool now, but
actually, it took guts.
It was pre-Ellen, right? Yeah. Pre-Ellen coming out?
Well, it actually was just not a couple of years maybe after that, but still, coming out in the 90s was not an easy thing.
It's still not easy. So
it's still not easy, but you never saw people holding hands in the in the malls like you do now. You didn't see any of that kind of thing. So it was a tough thing. So I just remember I used to be a regular at the Bennigan's, which was used to go to the. I mean, I'm back in the day. I could drink. I drank a lot. So I hung out at bars all the time. I was one of those.
Cheers,
people.
like Cheers.
Like Cheers. Yeah, it really kind of felt like Cheers because I was at Bennigan's all the time, and there was a gay bartender.
For our Gen Zers, it's like what Chili's or Bennigan's isn't really around anymore.
That's right. That's not around anymore.
Yeah,
that's right.
Just a bar, right?
That served pretty decent food too.
I think we had a Bennigan's in Merida growing up.
So, so I this is also the place where I met up with a bunch of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses as well. And that was helpful. Actually, I'll get to that in a second. But so there's this gay bartender that works there. And I remember I had the courage to come out to him. And I just had to tell somebody, but this guy had a shady reputation. So he was kind of like one of those people that spread gossip and told lies. So my strategy was I can come out to him, but if I decided that, oops, I made a mistake, and he goes around and tells everybody, I say, nah, he's a liar. You guys know he's a liar. He makes stories up about people. So even my very first person I came out to was very much well thought out. I'm going to come out to somebody, but it has somebody with a reputation that I could still, if I wanted to go back into the closet, I could deny it. And then everybody would believe me and nobody would believe him. Okay, so that's how it worked out. But I just remember I finally came out to him. And I remember I wake up the next morning and I just felt like so light on my feet, like the burden was lifted. I remember driving and the sun seemed that much more brighter. I just felt so good. It really was a very liberating feeling to have finally told somebody. So at that point, it was like, okay, I came out, I did it, and I don't have to worry. I'm going to start telling some of my friends and then eventually my family. So all the guys I would hang out at the bar with, then I started telling them. And of course, a lot of them were very homophobic. Did all the jokes and did all the toxic masculine stuff that you would have at the bar, which of course I was a participant in, right? And they all were on their own ways, were accepting of me. So I didn't lose any friends, which was good. And most of them are right-wing, conservative, and even one that really, he harbored racist views and homophobic views. And I thought maybe I'd lose him. I didn't even lose him as a friend.
He probably secretly thought you were cute. So, but yeah, I didn't lose any friends, so that gave me another support group, right? My drinking buddies, right? And some of my other friends. So I have this community. And then what was helpful too was a lot of the one of my best friends at the time was an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And then he also would hang out with other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. So we all in our own way could help each other because we both are dealing with them, the rejection of being ostracized by their family and the hurt and the pain they're suffering. So I could be empathetic with their plight because of the things that I've experienced in my life too. So it actually made for another great support group to talk to people and have kind of an understanding, with them as well, because you leave the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and you lose your family. They all turn your back on you. Of course, I thought maybe the same would happen to my family as well, that people would turn their back on me as well. Now, I didn't come out to everybody in the family, but most of the family did eventually I came out to my mom.
And how did they take it? Your mom?
My mom didn't. I honestly thought maybe she would have suspected. She did not suspect it, but she was very loving and very kind about it. And then she told Dad, and Dad, in his own way, my father was a very difficult person, so we didn't know how he would, and he was very, very anti-gay, very, very, very vocally anti-gay. But he did okay in his own way, so I didn't, and then my siblings, but then I had my younger sister who, when I talked to her, she was very accepting and very understanding of it. But her husband, who would end up becoming a minister, had maybe some views that were not as open to it, no, he's just trying to justify sin, Julie. Don't listen to him, that kind of thing. So there was a tension there that I had with him. And there's still kind of always been a tension between him and I a little bit about different things, So, yeah, but it was, I'm actually giving you just it's been so long since I've told any of this that if I get too deep, I'm going to probably start breaking down and crying and stuff. So I'm just trying to give you a basic understanding of the story because, but yeah, this was.
Now, when you're telling like important people like your mom, are they giving you that message that usually parents today would give to their son or daughters who are coming out as queer? Like, oh, it's okay, but don't act on it. Is that kind of like the message that you got, or like?
Yeah, so I made it really clear when I came out that I was going to openly be gay and I was not going to be celibate, that this is who I am and I'm going to date other men and stuff like that. So I made it very clear that that's part of the reason I'm coming out is I want to start, hanging out and going out on dates and doing this kind of stuff and being able to do it openly.
Yeah. Well, so that's pretty good that they took it. All right.
Well, this is the thing, like nobody, there's nobody that could go and say, well, I'm going to get into an argument with Steve about this. Because they just knew they're not going to win that argument because I do all the research, man, so nobody would take me on because they just knew that I think they're afraid to even take me on because maybe I would convince them that I was right and they wouldn't certainly want to have that happen either,
And by that point, have you reconciled your idea, like the ideas on the Bible about homosexuality with what you were going to decide to do? How were you thinking about those things? Were you thinking separate about your faith and then this path that you want to follow, or were you able to just bring them together?
Yeah, I just remember talking to one of my friends, and he said we were at the bar, and he said, "But it's a sin," and I said, "No, I don't think it's a sin." So at this point, I'm kind of leaning towards more of a progressive view of Scripture, and Christianity as well. I read a lot of stuff. I don't really know how to reconcile the verses even to this day. I think some of the verses that progressives would say aren't talking about homosexuality. You can argue that they are, but my point being is that I studied enough to know that there's another way of looking at the Bible and sexuality, that homosexuality as we understand it, like I said, the word didn't even exist until the 1940s.
Right.
So it's not even modern homosexuality is not in the Bible, as it's not there. So it's not really directly addressing what I would consider to be how we would understand homosexuality be in today's world.
Yeah, there's a documentary going to come out sometime soon called 1946, I think, about when the word homosexual was introduced in the Bible in 1946 and how that was interpreted to mean modern homosexuality, but that's not what it's talking about.
Yeah. And we don't have to get too deep in what the Bible has to say about it, but I think that the word before was the word sodomy, right? Was the word that they would use, right? But it's weird because the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah has nothing to do with homosexuality, right? It's not about that.
It's about rape.
It's about rape. And that was very common to this day. There are places in the Middle East that you have to be careful, like you could be raped if being a male. So
even in Utah, that's true sometimes.
Yeah, it's very possible everywhere. But I mean, within the cultural context, there's cultural rape that still happens, especially in some Middle Eastern cultures. So it seems to be something about that. Then it has to do with, so even using the word sodomy is not an accurate description of what was happening. It isn't homosexuality. It's rape. Yeah. Okay. So I studied this Bible well enough to know to come up with these answers so that I had a defense that I could give to defend my position as well.
So you concluded that the Bible wasn't anti-LGBT?
Well,
back
then I kind of was able to reconcile things in a way where I could still be a Christian, still believe in the Bible, and also be openly gay. And I was still on a tightrope, as you might imagine, right? But I was trying to figure out a way I could maneuver myself through this world, because this is uncharted territory at this point. There aren't a whole lot of people doing this, right?
In the late 90s.
In the late 90s,
early 2000s.
And that openly gay evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. So, where does your story take you? And I'm dying to know how you lost your faith.
Okay.
And then where this takes you in with Mormonism as well. But
Okay.
I don't want to rush whatever.
Oh, no, this is fine. I'm very comfortable. I just want to acknowledge that. So I'm age 25 and I'm working at Borders, and there's this guy who works, he's a barista in the cafe. And there's a bit of an age disparity, which back then wasn't, I don't know how people view it today, but I was 25 and he was 19. And I had a big crush on him. And so he was my first boyfriend. And I still have very much care for him. We both still have affection for each other. So that was a real big turning point to me to just, have a boyfriend and and I was openly out with we'd go out for dinner. I mean, I was very open. Now we go to Chicago a lot. That was a much safer place to go too, But yeah, so I just want to acknowledge Mauricio. You mean a lot to me. You really played a major role in my life, and I still care about you. I just want to thank you for being part of my life, Mauricio. So yeah, that meant a lot to me.
How long did you date Mauricio?
We were very tumultuous. It was a very tumultuous relationship. So he was in the process of moving to California and LA. He was all about the LA lifestyle and all that kind of stuff and jet set. And I was about, I want to stay in Northwest Indiana and get elected to office one day, maybe, He hated the region and I wanted to run for office. So we had that. And so he broke up with me when he took his job, or when he moved out to Los Angeles. And I was absolutely devastated by that. We actually did get back together again a couple of years later, started dating. That didn't work out anymore. So I hadn't talked to him for decades. Well, I guess, long story short, I started this channel up and then I started reaching back out to people, and he's one of the people I reached out to, and we started talking right when I started this channel. And I remember the first time he came on the Zoom, and I was like, "Oh, there you are!" And hey, I still have affection for you. Like I'm really, hey, good. Now we're just friends. We just talk now and then. But I mean, he was an important person in my life. We both suffered from mental like depression and anxiety and stuff like that. And so we were dealing with our ills, our issues. So that's part of what underlined why our relationship was kind of messy, because we both had a lot of mental issues too. Yeah. So we both acknowledge that now. So, hey, thanks Mauricio
Mauricio.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I just had to talk about him because he meant a lot to me.
No, that's great. Okay. So, did you have a question, Gerardo?
Is it around that time when you started losing your faith? How does that go?
No, actually, I remember even Mauricio was telling me when we were talking, when we got reconnected, because at some point we became friends again on Facebook, but just on Facebook. And then I had told him that I'd become atheist. And he had told me later on, as we were talking, he said, "Steve, when you told me you're atheist, that was so shocking to me because your faith played such an important role to you. Even while we were dating, my faith was very, very important to me." So he recognized how important of a role faith played in my life as well. Yeah. So yeah, that was. So
how did it happen? I'm dying to know. How did you lose your faith?
So actually I tell people, and I would tell people at the time, that I read myself out of Christianity. See, even though I researched and studied everything, right? I had a blind spot, and that was atheism. And it was also Christian apologetics. So I just thought, I don't have to worry about that. Atheism is just something out there. I didn't even think about it. I even thought later on, I thought, how in the world could I have walked past all these atheist books and not have paid any attention to them, right? Because it was just this blind spot. I wasn't even interested in reading about it. But what happened was, one day I decided I'm going to start studying Christian apologetics. I need to, Paul says we need to have a ready answer. I'm going to have the answer, and I'm going to be able to defend the faith in a way, even a better way than I had been doing. So I remember I just picked up the perennial bestseller by Josh McDowell called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And I remember picking that up. I was at Borders, and I started paging through it. And it didn't take me long to recognize that, we got a serious, serious problem here. I mean, literally just started paging through it and reading just a couple sentences. And I thought, oh no, this is not going to work. You can't make these arguments. And then I also had the recognition that I thought these apologists were defending the faith against atheists. They were there to be the counter-offensive to atheism. They were taking atheism head on, and they were beating them in debates, and we're winning. And I then recognized that most of the apologetic literature that was written was not written to convince atheists that Christianity is true or other people, but it was there to keep Christians in Christianity. It was to bolster people's faith. And that really bothered me.
What were the big arguments? I know
Just side note, but that's exactly the same story of Carrie.
Mostly.
No, not Carrie. It's Bike Your Professor.
Yeah.
And how he lost his faith in Mormonism. He realized after Mormon apologists didn't really have good answers for atheists. So he said, I'm going to take on that.
Yeah.
He started reading about atheism.
Mm-hmm. So what were the big arguments that were troubling to you against Christianity?
Well, the biggest problem
the main ones.
Well, the biggest problem I had with the apologetic book was that I was assuming he was addressing atheists, and then he made a statement in there. It was very clear. The Bible can be scientifically attested to, that that the science backs Christianity. And then he had a footnote. So I'm going to look at the footnote. Go through it, and I look, and it says the Genesis flood was this science text that he was referring to it how being Bible scientifically found. This is young earth creationism. Well, that's where the aha moment happened, because I thought, wait, if this is written for atheists, they're not going to accept that Christianity the Bible is scientifically valid because of some guys wrote a book about the flood happening 6,000 years ago. So that's the moment where I said, they're not writing this again. They're just writing this to keep people in the church. And like we said, I mean, that was just the most shocking thing for me. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I need to really study things. And so I had some idea about biblical scholarship, so I really studied biblical scholarship. So I remember this was probably the early 2000s, and I remember taking a survey on like BeliefNet or one of the sites that was around then, and asked you, what kind of Christian are you? And I remember filling it out, and the answer was, I was a liberal Quaker. It was the type of Christian I am. So this is the type of Christian I am, like liberal Quaker, okay? Because I kind of was starting to read, I was understanding the scholarship and trying to understand biblical scholarship, and also trying to read science and understand science a little bit better too, and trying to reconcile it with, scriptures and my faith and everything like that. But
for those who haven't watched maybe our David Bokovoy or Bart Ehrman episodes, can you summarize higher criticism or biblical criticism?
Yeah. So, and I will say that I probably wouldn't say I embrace all of what they were saying. I embraced all of it back then. Like I accepted.
I'm just saying, summarize the argument.
But the argument is that that what we think is in the Bible or was in the original manuscripts is not there. Like the long ending of Mark was added on later on. That the Yohim Koma, the Trinitarian formula that's in John, was actually added by Erasmus around in the 1400s. It wasn't in the original text. That Matthew didn't write Matthew, Mark didn't write Matthew. The four synoptic gospels or the three synoptic gospels weren't written by the authors that were attached to them. At least this is what that school of thought has to say. I do have an opinion on that. And then we have is the documentary hypothesis regarding the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, right? And that the idea is that they weave together. That there's actually comes from different sources that were weaved together. So the J or Yahwist source, you have the P, the priestly source. And like two or three.
Isn't there Q?
No, Q is actually the idea that we have the Gospel of Mark is the oldest gospel.
Oh, I didn't want to take you off Old Testament.
Oh no, but okay. I can circle back to Old Testament. That Q is another source that Matthew and Luke would have been using in addition, and that there's parts that are not in there, that Q would be the source of where these things would have come from to create that's not in Mark, but it's in Matthew and Luke. So they're working off those texts, and they're just Quelle is German for source. And that's where we get the Q hypothesis, which most biblical scholars do accept. But I kind of think there might be a counter argument to that as well. So we'll
get to that later.
Yeah, and that's fine. So then we get back to this idea is that the Pentateuch was not written by Moses, but it was all these different sources, some from the northern kingdom, some from the southern kingdom, and different scribes, and it was all put together and then was presented as something that came from Moses. Right. So would that be a pretty good summary?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes you realize that the Bible isn't anything like you thought. You just kind of imagine Matthew. Let me tell you about what I saw when I was hanging around Jesus, and but it's nothing like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's right. And there are believing scholars who believe all this and are still believing in God and Jesus and all this. So it's not a deal buster. As a matter of fact, I tell people, Bart Ehrman did not leave Christianity because of biblical scholarship. He left it because of the problem of evil. So that was not a deal breaker for him either. But it really did bother me because it gave me a view of Scripture that I wasn't taught. And a lot of these scholars are learning this at Christian universities. And there's ministers, at least some, that are also being taught this as well, or at least made aware of it. And they're not addressing it in their sermons, and they're not talking about it.
I do want to say this, and I don't know if you know this, Steve, but even David Bokovoy, even after going to school and learning all this higher criticism of the Bible, he still wanted to make Mormonism work. He still wanted to work for BYU.
Yeah. He
still wanted to teach institute and religious classes. So I think something David Bokovoy has been demonized by making a lot of ex-Mormons lose their faith on Jesus. But I think the approach that David Bokovoy takes is not like,
and if people want to believe, they're going to believe. It doesn't matter what any evidence is.
Yeah.
So, but to your point, belief can be incredibly resilient. Rod Meldrum is the testimony. Belief can overcome everything, right? Yeah.
I like Rod. That's why I like Rod so much.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I didn't. So I would say I was still born again Christian believer, but also had a pretty good knowledge of all the biblical scholarship. So that would inform me.
But you were saying maybe you felt betrayed.
Yeah.
That you hadn't been told this by all the pastors and religious educators.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm not going to any church, because I feel like these guys are not telling everybody like the full story here. They're hiding things from people.
And that we relate to in the more. Jen's nodding her head.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I think that there are a lot of parallels in my world too.
This is your heritage, your birthright.
My birthright.
It's your birthright.
It's my birthright. I have a right to know
how your Bible came together.
That's right, man. Right? And I was going to find out and get to the bottom of this and look at all the sources and stuff. So I did. So now I have like this understanding of biblical scholarship and all these other things. But then I really started questioning whether there was a God or not. It really started becoming more and more apparent to me that maybe there wasn't a God, because in one sense it got me wrong, right? Like what Christians were saying about gay people and how I actually was it didn't jive. They weren't saying, like I told people, I said, if everything you said about gay people was true, then I wouldn't like them either. But you're not saying true things about gay people. This is not authentic and true, and you're spreading lies and you're bearing false witness against other people. And so that really bothered me. So I just had to kind of separate myself from the church altogether. I couldn't even go to weddings at some point because the pastor would use the wedding as a denunciation of those who want to get, ruin this by gay marriage. I remember one pastor talking about David and Jonathan, and some gay people, and this was at a wedding, some people want to say that they were gay, they're distorting and they're corrupting and perverting scripture, and those are the kind of things you hear during wedding ceremonies, right? So even going to wedding ceremonies became a real burden, very burdensome to me as well. So I just kind of had to cut myself from all of that. But I couldn't be a liberal. That's the thing. So I couldn't see myself going to a progressive Christian church. Because I was like, that's just namby-pamby nonsense. I don't, it's like, oh, we're going to take up an offering for the dolphins to save them. It's like, that's how I felt at the time. You're like, I'm not going to want that, So I didn't, so liberal or progressive Christianity held no interest to me. So I started realizing that I got to now really start. I think this is about when the new atheists came on the scene. So you got Christopher Hitchens, you got Sam Harris, you got Daniel Dennett. And
after 9/11 is when the 2001, 2002, 2003.
Yeah, it was that period of time. And see, September 11th really did kind of affect me on some level too. I think I remember I was at a dinner and there was a minister talking, and they were talking about, and I still would say I was a believer, right? And remember that cross beam that was shaped like a cross that survived and became this symbol?
On the World Trade Center site, yeah.
And this minister goes and says, in the midst of all of this, God made a point to reach in there and create that cross or cause that cross to happen. And I'm just sitting there hearing him say that. Why didn't he reach in there and save all their lives? Right? You mean to tell me he's like, I'm going to make some statement by creating some cross in this rubble amongst this carnage? And you think, because he was actually the head of the Salvation Army at Ground Zero at their tent, and he was speaking about it. And so he was there firsthand, and he seemed to think that this cross really was important. And I'm sitting there like, this is horrible. Like, no, that's not a good argument. That's not God. That's not my God, right? And so that really, really kind of bothered me immensely. God took the time to put his hand in there and make that cross. No, I didn't like that at all. And then see, there's a lot of that in Christianity. And we see that also within Mormonism, that thought, miracles. And there's a child being raped right now. I still feel that way. I still have a very nuanced view of my Christian faith too. God is really behind this whole thing that I'm doing, and I'm brought here because of God and all this. I also recognize there are horrible things happening to people right now who are screaming out to God, and nothing is being done. And so I acknowledge that as well. So I just think that we have to make sure that we're also grounded in reality too, So there's just things that set me off. Then I started reading all the new atheist stuff. George Bush's things are spiraling with Katrina, and he shows he's completely incompetent as a president at this point. So now my Republican Party is letting me down. Everything is just kind of collapsing. My world that I thought was my foundations were just kind of crumbling. You know what I'm saying? During this period of time. So that's when
I lost my faith in republicanism, and now I'm nonpartisan, so I don't want you to think that means I'm listeners, they get so mad when you talk politics. Mm-hmm. But I had been voting only for Republican up until around 2001, 2002. Mm-hmm. That's when I stopped voting Republican at the time, and that's when I started losing my faith. So we're losing our faith
right around the same time.
Right around the same time. Not that it matters, but
no, that's actually kind of, when you think.
By the way, I'm a registered Republican now. Republicans, don't be mad at me, but
he's a rhino. He's a rhino. So
the universe has us in parallel, having a faith crisis at the same time.
No, that's right. Yeah,
in republicanism and in our faith.
Yeah. It is interesting that we're going through this journey together in one sense. So just this whole world's collapsing, and then I'm just said I'm going to read all the atheists' books. I'm going to read every single one of them. And
Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett.
Yep.
Harris.
Yep. Just all of them. Every single one of the bestsellers, all the books. And then I was reading every book in the atheist section.
Bertrand Russell.
Yeah. I was reading some of the old classics.
Who's the guy that early 1900s who wrote about atheism quite a bit? I'm forgetting his name.
Yeah,
anyway.
I'm sure I read some of his stuff. I would read Skeptic Well, I actually would read Skeptic magazine since the mid 90s. I really liked that magazine. So I always kind of had a little bit of a skeptical bone in me, because I'm a truth seeker. So I want to read everything. I wasn't afraid to read things, But I just read all this stuff, and I remember I was reading Samuel Harris's book, A Letter to a Christian Nation.
Yeah.
And I'm reading this book. Now, I'm still clinging to faith at this point. And I remember the moment where I'm reading in the book, and he said, and for those progressive Christians and gay-affirming Christians, get out of your clown costumes, your vestments, and just realize this is all like BS or something. It was like a line like along those lines. It was almost like he was just saying, come on, it's a farcical. You're playing a farce. You're dressing up for church in these vestments, like talking about like these liberal progressives that, are playing church or dressing up. And you just got to accept none of this is true. And it's not true. And I just remember like,
not just that, he made the argument that they were enabling evil.
Yes.
That they were enablers of evil.
Yes, that they almost in one sense were the worst type of Christians.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Because I was a progressive Mormon at the time. Yeah.
So that to me was like, okay, game over. I'm an atheist now.
Because Sam Harris said so.
He said so. That's right. Yeah. So I was pretty hardcore atheist for a long time there. Yep. I read myself out of Christianity.
So how many years did you identify as an atheist or agnostic, do you think?
Okay, so I would say this had to have been probably around 2006 or so. And then I would have probably called myself a pretty hardcore atheist probably till, I would say probably about 2017, 2018, I would have then started thinking of myself as more agnostic maybe. So I my heart started softening towards believers and people of faith. And I could see some positivity in people having faith. So I kind of went from being like, I hate religion and burn the whole thing down to I can see some utility to it. And so that kind of put me more in an agnostic camp,
And if I'm remembering the timeline from part one, it's around 2005, 2006, where you experience your worst depression.
Yeah. So
where you start to feel like there's no reason to be living.
Yeah.
Except for studying Mormonism.
Yeah.
But do I have the timeline right that your major depression corresponds with your self-identification as atheist?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think I have been suffering from depression all my life. And I actually, just to give you another example of September 11th, I was in the midst of horrible depression during September 11th. And when September 11th happened, my depression subsided. And the reason why it subsided was because everybody else was in my world now. They were all shell-shocked. They were all in mourning. They were all depressed. So I thought like, well, I can live in this world. So my depression went away because I'm like, everybody else is like me now. So I flourished after September 11th happened on a personal level.
Okay.
Yeah, it was weird.
But you did talk about those 10 years or so where you didn't want to live.
Yeah. And so that would have been after I'm an atheist, I become an atheist. And then I had some bad years. Actually, I had some bad years so I guess you could say that really bad years in 2006, 2007. Then I had a little bounce where I was doing better, for about a year or so. But then I just really spiraled. I lost a job. I was fired. It was the first time I was ever fired from a job. And that just began the spiral of me just kind of disconnecting from humanity, not wanting to have anything to do with anybody in my family, just cutting myself from everybody, all my friends, everybody. So now we're looking at my final separation from everybody in my life would have probably been around circa 2010, 2011, where now I've just entered into a world of isolation. I don't want to know anybody. I don't want to have a relationship with anybody. I'm just in pain. I'm in pain partly because of all that I went through being gay and closeted and all the cruel things that were said about me. I said, one of the nice advantages of being in the closet is you get to hear what people say about you behind your back, right? Because they don't know you're gay. So you get to hear all the comments to how they really think about you. That's one advantage that you get to have by being in the closet. So I know how everybody felt, and I never really got the family to really be fully accepting of me. And I also I did and said things that were self-isolating. So I did things that pushed them away as well. So it's not just like, oh, I'm the victim. I recognize that I said things too that would have been, where I would have been pushing them away as well. So yeah, that puts us like around the beginning of the last decade. And so I basically just completely isolated from the world. I spent quite a bit of my time alone at our Michigan property. And I was in a rural area, so I was very isolated from people.
Upper Peninsula?
No, well, we had a cottage in the Upper Peninsula. This was in the Dutch Triangle of Southwest Michigan. So I spent quite a bit of time there, and I was relatively isolated from people. And then I would come down, sometimes down to Florida during the winter. And so the only people I had any connection to was my parents. In the family, that's it. And I'd completely cut ties with everybody else, including the rest of my family and friends. And they were just basically my lifeline. That's the only reason I contemplated homelessness. I thought of ways that I could probably go homeless, or, how I could do it, right? Living in cars, whatever, that kind of thing. Those would be things that were real things that I was seriously considering, that would be maybe where I would end up, or that if I don't commit suicide, what would I need to do to be homeless? Yeah. So that's really where I was at. I was in a real dark place.
It's dark, man. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I was in hell, man. I was in hell. And the thing that made it so bad was there was a period of time where I was doing so well and I was flourishing. So I had depression, really, I was flourishing for a while when I was working at Borders, and then took a job with the congressional campaign. And then I took a job selling cars for about 5 years at a Ford dealership in Calumet City, Illinois. And that was kind of okay for a while. So I made good money and stuff. But then as I was there after a couple of years, that became a miserable experience. So I'm making money, but I'm absolutely miserable. And then I have a little bounce back after I leave that job, and I kind of get back involved in politics again, and I'm kind of in some success again. And then things kind of fall through there. And it's almost like once I was fired, it was like at that point, I just realized like, oh no, I'm sliding. I knew I was going to go to a very deep, dark place for a very, very long time. And it was just really bad. It was horrible for me. And because I knew I lost all hope. I had no options in my life. So I completely lost hope. So, during these episodes of depression throughout the years, and would be like even counting the 10-year period that I was really bad, throughout all these depressive times, I would be reading, studying other things. But the one thing I kept going back to was my study of Mormonism. And I had mentioned to you before how I recognize that if that part of me dies, that interest of me dies, then I die. So that's what threw me into studying Mormonism so much. And that, I honestly tell you, folks, Mormonism saved my life. Studying it, I had a community. It was just words on pages, but I had friends there. I had Joseph Smith, my bud, right? I had a connection to something that I was interested in that kept me alive. And so for me, I will forever be grateful to Mormonism and to Joseph Smith because you saved my life.
That's cool.
It did.
Yeah.
It saved my life.
Powerful.
And I don't know what to make of that. Is it just like our history is, like there's a big fascination with cults these days, whether it's the Vow or Scientology and Going Clear or, Wild Wild Country, So, I mean, you could look at it from that angle, or you could look at it from just interesting history that's going back into the 19th century. And it's the most successful American-born religion ever.
Yeah.
There's that angle.
Well, Seventh-day Adventists might dispute that, but...
oh, right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Okay, second.
Yeah.
Wealthier, though.
Yeah, definitely.
More powerful.
Yeah, the Seventh-day Adventists are too busy building hospitals.
That was a dig.
Well, I think the Mormons should be building hospitals. I think it would be a wonderful ministry.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah. So what was it? Why? I was going to ask you this. Why not Jehovah's Witnesses? Why not Scientologists? Why not other cults or high demand religions? Or, You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
Mormonism?
Well, I studied all those religions, and that's when I was good friends with the Jehovah's Witnesses. They
I
told
know,
me,
but you're not saying that about
right,
them.
right.
You're saying
So
that about
those
us.
were interesting subjects, but it never pulled. I was only pulled back in. They kept pulling me back in that
Yeah, it's
Mormonism,
Godfathers.
right?
Al Pacino.
Exactly. It kept pulling me back in, and for whatever reason, I kept on going back to it and going back
Why?
to that. Well,
I'm just curious. What was it about
I had
Mormonism?
this insatiable curiosity, right,
Well,
about it.
There's nothing. We don't know why. It just happened to be Mormonism for you.
It just happened to be Mormonism. I just had this obsession.
It's not that we're that cool. It's not that we're that cool.
I think you guys are awesome. I think it's really cool. I'm a fanboy, man. Like
It was
across
the Book
the
of
board.
Mormon he found in the hotel room when he was
Yeah,
little.
when I was a little boy,
Arnold Freeberg.
the Arnold Freiberg paintings, that ultimately led to. I mean, think about all that. If I didn't have Mormonism, I don't know if I would be alive today.
Yeah.
And so I have to acknowledge that fact. And so yeah, it's I'm very grateful that for whatever reason I was interested in it. And I remember even being pissed off at myself, like, you're such a fool, Steve. You're studying all this stuff. What good is it doing? Like, you know what? Because when you're suffering depression, you're just attacking yourself constantly, you know, and you're hurting yourself. And you, as you could quite imagine, I would make a very formidable opponent, right? Imagine me turning my guns on myself. I put myself through hell, right? And so that's what was going on. So I would even get angry at myself for being interested in Mormonism. But I kept on going, kept on reading, kept on going online, watching YouTube videos, watching Mormon stories, watching gospel tangents, watching anything I could, in addition to all the reading and research I was doing on the internet or books that I was buying. It was just something that kept me going, man, kept me going.
And it wasn't, you probably wouldn't have processed it at the time as trying to save Mormons from like a fallen false church.
No. If anything, it just kind of reinforced my atheism, because yeah, that's what it did. In one sense, it reinforced my atheism. I gave you a naturalistic explanation for the coming forth of the Book of Mormon yesterday, right? So I was developing all these strains of thoughts as an atheist, and also was showing like, well, if I can make the same apologetic arguments about the resurrection of Christ as I can with Mormonism, I can make all the same arguments. Then I recognize that the futility of modern Christian apologetics is garbage. In one sense, you could say that it is. Or it's not, but modern apologists need to acknowledge the Book of Mormon and Mormonism and acknowledge their arguments and take them into consideration when they're making their apologetics remarks, defenses, that they need to at least account for Mormonism. I think that's important that they do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I think about like some of my Christian friends who are into Mormonism, I've always had this perception that it's sort of a little bit of a condescending, you're part of a false church, you're part of a cult. So I feel called to minister. I'm coming to Utah, kind of the Aaron Shevelevel off.
Yes, exactly.
Like, you're fallen, I'm saved, and I'm here to bless you, to rescue you so you don't go to hell. And that's just, for me, that's just a non-starter. I'm just like, that's as bad as the Mormon church telling everybody they're false. Like, not interested in that. But you're saying that wasn't what was driving you all those years.
No. I mean, I think the initial thing was I got to win that argument with that kid at Powell's Books, right? The old Calvinist. But then that was just my initial foray into really studying it. So if anything, I'm studying Mormonism while I'm in different stages of depression, also in different phases of my, coming out to people, being a born again Christian, becoming a progressive Christian, becoming an atheist, and I'm reading Mormonism all along with this journey as well, right? So it's been following me along in this whole process. So that's just all part of my story. So Mormonism plays a role in this whole thing. So I remember I was at a Catholic seminary and talking to a Catholic priest, because I had a friend who was an MDiv student there, and I was visiting them. And of course, I spent the whole time just reading their Mormon section while, in their library, while it was there, while he's in classes. And I remember a priest coming up to me and said, "I hear you're really interested in Mormonism because you're trying to like witness to them." And I kind of said, "Yeah, but that wasn't my motivation. I never looked at it as being like my motivation that I was trying to witness to Mormons. I just was interested in it." So.
Right.
Then.
Well, I really like what you said about the faults that you could see with Mormonism, you could see in Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of came to this realization: if we're gonna accept Christianity, Christians have to acknowledge that they have as many faults as Mormons do. So we probably should consider each other.
Yeah. Well,
and
I'm not going to keep score of like who has more faults than the other.
Right.
But I'm just saying that there are faults within Christianity that Christians need to acknowledge. If you're going to study Mormonism and you're going to use it as a tool to do missionary work, guys, all right, just hear me out. Do your homework, because they're not doing their homework, and they're not doing any self-examination, and they're not taking the same research and the same critical thinking skills that they have towards Mormonism. They're not doing it as well or as rigorously with Christianity as they are with Mormonism. They're just trying to prove Mormonism wrong, but they're not really looking at maybe some flaws within Christianity as well.
Yeah.
With much love to Sandra Tanner, that was the most common criticism of her episode. It's like, whoa, you're great about applying a critical eye to the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith, but some people criticize Sandra for kind of turning that off when it came to the Bible.
Yeah, and I don't want to criticize Sandra too much.
Me either.
But yeah,
I'm just saying what people's reaction was.
And I think that, but I also think that, Sandra doesn't have a malevolence against Mormonism that some of these other characters do.
No, she's good natured. Yeah. She's super good natured.
Yeah. So and some people, they just have, that's her faith and I respect it, and that's where she's at. And yeah, I sometimes think that, but I understand that, but I don't have an issue with her, but I get your point. But
no, it's not a point.
Yeah.
It's just an observation. Topical of what we're talking about.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. So this is just total geekiness of me, like reverse geekery here. But like so you're watching Mormon Stories starting around, or you're watching Mormon themed podcasts and YouTube channels starting around what year?
Oh, I was as soon as like YouTube starts getting big. So I actually started probably with Sean McCraney's Heart of the Matter when he was at the peak of his powers.
Yeah.
2008, 2009. And I watched him. So I was a regular watcher of his. I consumed his product a lot. Yeah. And of course, once you go down the Mormon rabbit hole, you start running into other people. And then at some point, I'd have to say within the last, I can't really, because I was still also in the midst of a lot of depression, it's like everything's like one big like blur for me. So I couldn't give you a precise date when I started.
No, it's fine.
Right. I'm just saying, I'm trying to think it out myself when I did. But I would say that, so I've been probably watching you for probably 7, 8, 9 years, maybe 10.
And it's fun for me to imagine like my friend Steven doesn't know any Mormons. He's somewhere in Michigan or Illinois or Indiana watching YouTube, and he's like learning about the Swedish Rescue. He's like, go Hans Matson. And he's like, hearing about ordained women. And he's like, whoa, they're, and then, John, excommunication. Will John get excommunicated? And, Jeremy Reynolds came out with this document. And I'm just trying to imagine this dude who doesn't know a Mormon, who's glued to YouTube as he's trying to follow all these current events that are happening. And Mitt Romney is running for president. And then like, how's the church dealing with it? All the Gospel Topics essays come out. Like, were you like observing all that history and current events? And,
I was. Do
you remember those moments? Things I want to hear what things you cared about as you were like following Mormonism as a never Mormon, ex-evangelical atheist gay man.
Okay. So, and see, that's the thing. I was waving the atheist flag while I'm watching your program, as you might imagine. So like, you go, John, you take them all down and all this kind of stuff and burn the whole thing down. Let's just, so I was pretty hardcore and all that. So yeah, I think that, boy, there's so much, and I can't isolate anything. But first of all, I think maybe your interview with Sean McCraney might be one of my entry points that I had with Mormon Stories, and so that might have been where I maybe met you for the first time, was about then, and then so that one really stuck out.
Do you remember how he came across? Because he came off differently to me in that interview than he did on Heart of the Matter.
Yeah,
I tried to humanize him. a little bit.
Yeah, and actually that's what I try to do with my guests as well, especially the controversial ones, is they're a human being. And so, and Sean, he was 180. He was a completely different person. And a lot of Mormons even acknowledged that, wow, this I kind of like this guy, this kind of Sean McCraney. He was just a showman. Remember, Sean's a showman.
Yeah.
That's all he is. And and of course, then I was so disappointed that Mitt Romney didn't win because, boy, that would have been great for me because they'd be talking about nothing but Mormonism for the next 40 years in the national conversation, right? So there's, it was just, like I said, this was a period of time where I'm suffering severe depression, but I'm watching your program, I'm reading these books, and it's just kind of keeping me going. And then, of course, probably about 6-7 years ago, I run into Rick, or about maybe a year after Rick Bennett started, I started watching Gospel Tangents. And what I really, the two big things I like most about, the one part I like most about your program is when you bring the scholars on, right? Like the scholars of Mormonism, the historians. That's my wheelhouse right there. So just about every scholar that you would have had on in the last decade, historian,
Metcalf, Vogel, Quinn, Bushman, Givens.
Yep.
Kathleen Melanakis.
Yep.
Yeah.
Kathleen Melanakis. She was an interesting lady. I bought that book. Yeah. So there was just all these. So I watched a lot of your stuff and really got
Grant Palmer.
Oh yeah, Grant Palmer, man. I wish I would have met that guy. I remember even watching when you had that special at that person's home,
honoring him right before he died.
Yeah, and like I remember the guy playing one of the rocks playing
Tyler Glenn.
Yeah, Tyler Glenn.
Yeah,
playing the guitar and everything like that. Well, and that's the thing. It's like even maybe I'm hearing a little bit of maybe Grant Palmer, maybe some of the stuff he's saying is kind of luring me back in a little bit too. So there's a process of, I think throughout the years, there's just little things that maybe seeds that are being planted. And even Grant Palmer, like I intently watched him and really liked him, but he's a Christian, right? And he's teaching the gospel and I ain't hating on the guy, So then maybe it just dawned on me like, oh wait, Grant Palmer. Yeah. He might've even played a role in this whole thing, watching Mormon Stories. So, I mean,
you would have seen Sandra's interview.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sandra. I mean, and of course, Sandra was a hero to me ever since, I was engaged in the Tanners since I was in high school and reading their stuff. I knew about the Tanners probably since maybe middle school.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so fun to think about people out there who watch.
Yeah.
And people are sick of me saying this, but half our viewers now have never been Mormons. Yeah. So I wonder if there are other people out there for whom Mormon Stories means as much to them as it did for you. It's humbling, and I'm really grateful to maybe for all of us to be playing a small role in people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. I think you have a ministry, John. I told you yesterday, I think you're going to be a pastor one day.
People say you already run your own church.
Cult of Mormon Stories. Okay, so when is the next part?
So let's just talk about the Chris Thomas interview. You want to go there?
Yeah, so that's right as COVID's beginning, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris Thomas is this lovely man who's a charismatic Pentecostal preacher who lives in, you're getting emotional, who lives in Tennessee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he reaches out to me and I have lunch with them and he's just the kindest guy in the world. Yep. Smarter than all of us put together, but also connected with the Maxwell Institute and writes a book on Mormonism and how he sees Pentecostalism in the Book of Mormon. And he would just stop me at breakfasts and lunches and just, John, the Lord loves you, John, or, Jesus loves you, John. And I'm just like, I love you, Chris. Thanks. But feeling a little bit torn about a Christian kind of saying those types of things to me and loving him and talking to me about the Beatles and rock and roll. So I have Chris Thomas on here. It was here. Did you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we used to have the interview studio right over there.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was in that room with the table where I interviewed Chris, right when I'm just starting to try and up our video and audio game before I knew you, Gerardo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is before Gerardo improved our cinematography. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's a great interview. So I interviewed Chris.
Yeah.
What's that like for you when you're watching it?
Well, so I crack open a couple beers. I'm gonna watch get my Mormon Stories fixed, right?
Had you heard of Chris before then?
No, never heard of him.
Okay.
No. And I just started watching him. Now you gotta understand, I come from upper middle class evangelical charismatic world, we looked at Pentecostals as being on the other side of the tracks. They're
Really?
Yes, they're rubes. No, I'm not a Pentecostal. I'm a charismatic, right? I'm not having anything to do with those Pentecostals, man. And so I thought, let's give this guy a shot and see what happens. This is going to be fun. John's going to run this guy through the ringer.
Because to us, there's no difference between you and Chris.
Right.
To you, there's all the difference of the world.
Yeah.
It's like Pakistan versus India.
Yeah.
To us, they're all
the same.
But to you, like Chris is like.
Yeah. Well, I was culturally inclined to not be too keen on Pentecostals, especially like, oh, he's from the South. On top of it, every stereotype goes through my mind. So I still had my old prejudices, even as an atheist, right? So I start watching, and I find the conversation to be extraordinarily engaging and fascinating, and his life story is just great. And I'm falling in love with this guy, and I'm just like, I like this guy so much. And then I remember the second episode, it's like he starts talking about the Book of Mormon. And here I have a Pentecostal defending the Book of Mormon to John Dehlin, kind of like, well, wait, John, it's not just, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's some value in the Book of Mormon type kind of thing. I'm just like, okay, so this is kind of cool, right? and then I'm like, we get to the third episode, and that's when you had church service. You and Chris Thomas had church service. And what
do you mean by that?
It means that I think that Chris was there to minister to you. And but I would realize later that he was ministering to me as well. So I hear what he had to say, and I just remember watching the episode, and it was for the first time where I thought, that's a type of Christian and Christianity that I think I might be able to get back to or would consider. And so that episode really, really touched me and really started pushing me back to Jesus. So thank you, John. Thank you so much for having him on, because it really brought me back. It brought me back, man.
That's so recent. 2020.
I mean, this is what makes this so wild, is that think of how much of a whirlwind this is. This is a very short period of time where all this has happened.
So 2 years ago, you still don't know a Mormon.
A year and a half ago,
and you're an atheist agnostic.
Yep.
And then you see an interview 2 years ago.
Yeah. And then that starts pushing me. Like, okay, I think I can work with this.
So what'd you do?
And it just planted a seed in me, right? So then I just remember COVID starts, and I live in a Christian community, and I'm sitting at the pool, and I'm hearing...
What state?
This is in Florida.
Okay.
And I'm hearing these Christians talking, and it's just the start of COVID. And all of a sudden, all these people are talking about like QAnon and weird conspiracy theories and human trafficking, not like the real human trafficking, but this kind of fantasy human trafficking narrative.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what is going on here? Like, I was shocked. And I thought, wait a second here, this doesn't make sense. Just like September 11th happened, and my depression got lifted, COVID-19 hit, and I was at peace. It was a similar kind of thing. But this one, I was more really at peace. And I just recognized that the Bible tells us that Christians are supposed to have a peace that surpasseth all understanding, right? So I'm sitting here hearing all this fear and all this conspiracy talk. And I said, theologically, I should be the one that's afraid. Why do I have a peace that surpasseth all understanding? So it was almost like I had this realization that these other Christians were the ones that really needed Jesus in one sense, and that I had something that I could offer them. It's like I, for like 20 years, left the village, Christianity, and I'm walking back towards it, and I get to the village, and the village is on fire. And so in one sense, I'm kind of glad I walked away, because what Christianity had become in this 20-year-old period, it became something I didn't recognize anymore. So then my heart melts for these people, because I recognize they've been lied to. They don't have the tools to be able to cope with this world and with something like COVID. Those tools were taken away from them because they were promised so many things from the pulpit. One of them being, don't worry, you'll be fine. You'll be raptured away. Well, here we have an apocalypse, a mini apocalypse that we're in, right? And they're still here. And these pastors told them they'd be flying away. So they're trying to then negotiate all this. And you also have to keep in mind, too, that most Christians growing up really believe that, like if you went back in time and told somebody that we'd be here in the year 2020, they'd say, you're of the devil, you're spreading lies. There's no way we'll be here in the year 2020. So we also have this issue where all the formulas of when Jesus was supposed to return, all those dates had expired.
Yeah.
So now you have these Christians that are kind of like just grasping for answers of trying to figure out what's going on. You know, they latched onto the blood moons in 2015 and all these different prophecies that are going on, and they're just and they totally forget about what this one prophet said, and then they go move on to the next one. I mean, as an outsider and as a critical thinker, I'm like, don't you see what's going on here? You know, you're just helping these.
Jesus is not coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say he ain't coming anytime soon. In my mind, I mean, I think it's and I remember even in the 1990s telling somebody that the period 2020 to 2030, I told a few people this, will be called the second great disappointment. Because once you get past this period of time, the entire dispensationalist end time scenario, which is pretty dominant within certain sectors of evangelicalism, the entire edifice collapses at that point. And so being the great disappointment, most Christians by now would have thought we would have been in the second or third decade of the millennium. We should not be here. So now that is going to force the hand of Christianity, American Christianity in particular. They're going to have to make some major theological adjustments over the next 20 to 30 years, because a lot of the stuff that they were told was going to happen hasn't happened. And it's almost like the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's gotten to be a joke. You know, that you can't take them seriously. And how can you take a lot of these end time people seriously within the evangelical world? Because basically they did a kind of a Jehovah's Witness thing. And so they have no credibility in my mind.
Don't forget the preppers in Mormonism. We've got our preppers too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of
the reason why I'm laughing is that just thinking that our church is called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but we've been in the latter days since 1830. And no Jesus.
Yeah. And these are serious challenges to American evangelical Christianity. Yeah. And it's a serious challenge to Mormonism. So we're kind of all in the same boat.
Yeah. Where are you, Jesus? When are you coming? I'm kidding.
I know.
Okay. So you're feeling like Christianity's on fire.
Mm-hmm. And not in the baptism of the Holy Spirit on fire.
But you don't, it doesn't sound like you turn to save Christianity. It turns like you turn to Mormonism. So how does that happen?
Well, so none of this makes sense, right? So that's why I think God might be part of it. Like, why aren't I doing something else rather than this? And I think that I really don't know where this goes. And the Lord told me earlier, I said, don't make any plans. Don't worry about what you're going to say, because you're going to say things you didn't, and they're going to hear you say things you didn't even say.
Okay, wait. In your mind, the Lord is, a couple of years ago, the Lord starts talking. He started,
and then it's not like an audible voice or anything like that.
What's he saying?
Well, he shows me things and he tells me things. He gives me advice. Just a few words of advice that he gave me early on in the process. He really hasn't said anything to me. Just like I just got a few, like, okay, when I returned, it was like he was waiting there and he said, okay, are you through with all this? I'm like, yeah. He said, you ready to go? I'm like, okay. Boom. Then this whole thing takes off.
Meaning what?
That next thing you know, I'm my channel, this little guy who looks like a hostage video when he does his book review. He's got poor production values, and he's like,
So you start a channel called
Mormon Book Reviews.
And the idea is or was what?
To review the books in my collection. I thought, well, I'm going to start reviewing these books, you know. And I remember even saying, maybe I'll even get some authors on, you know. I don't know. I'm going to see what happens. And never in a million years would I would think within months, I mean, within weeks, in a very short period of time, I'm talking to like all the people's books that I bought. I got their books in my bookshelf, and now I'm booking them to come on my program. And I did not expect that. And then I go, Rick Bennett forces my hand, twists my arm, tells me, you got to go to Mormon History Association. I'm like, okay, Rick, I'll go to Mormon History Association. And of course, that's when I land Bushman, and that's where I land a few other people. And then I make all these connections with people. And it's like, then I start talking.
I have to say, I remember this is when Rick and I did that interview we haven't released.
I know.
Right around that time, you're just starting up.
Yep.
And you like messaged me. It's like, John, Rick and I mentioned you on one of my episodes. And I'm
that's
like,
right.
who is this guy? And what, you know what I mean? And you were like all excited that like, you wanted me to know we had talked to. And I was like, do these people hate me? Do they like me? Who are these people? Why are they talking about me? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I remember those early.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was so exciting because my very first interview was of Rick Bennett. And it was the day that Rick interviewed you.
Yeah.
And so.
Which we may release someday, but we haven't released yet.
Okay, Rick, just so you know, I'm working on it. Maybe we can get the first 2 hours. So
part of it is my fault.
It's all Gerardo's fault.
It's all,
Rick. It's all Gerardo.
Yes, I can confirm that. Yeah,
no,
absolutely.
I'm kidding. But I was worried that I came off too angry. And it was during a time where we were under attack. And then I showed it to Gerardo, and
Gerardo's like,
Gerardo wasn't sure it would be constructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
can you imagine though?
Yeah.
Here I am, my favorite podcasters. I did a joint production with Rick Bennett, and then I get the inside baseball of he's doing this interview of him, and then I'm talking to John Dehlin on chatting with him on Reddit, and then the next morning I wake up and I have 20 friends on Facebook, and Sandra Tanner makes a friend request. I'm like, what is going on here? You know, like I'm talking to like, you know, royalty in my mind, you know, Mormon royalty and the big names, and I'm just like, this is crazy. And then even just like, I mean, think how, like, folks, none of you know about this interview. Like, I'm one of the few people who knew about this interview. So then, like, one of the first people Rick calls to say that John doesn't want me to air this thing, or he's not going to let it go. Like, all of a sudden, I'm in between. I'm like, I got my podcaster buddy talking about my other podcaster guy that I think the world of. I'm like, I'm right in the middle of all of it. I was just, this is like maybe a few weeks into it, and I'm already like in the middle of the drama. You know, this drama that I'm in. I'm like, man, I'm an active participant in this whole thing. So that was kind of a wild time.
That's fun. Yeah, and since then you've interviewed, you know, I started really paying attention when you started getting interviews that I can't get. So you're interviewing Richard Bushman. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. And then you're interviewing Robin Jensen of the Joseph Smith Papers Project, who I was friends with years ago, but like he won't come on anymore. And I'm just like, curse you, Steven Pynakker. You can get people I can't, you know?
I know. It's pretty wild, dude.
But I'm not envious. I'm grateful. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I'm glad they're talking to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we all actually play a role in documenting the story.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing story that's unfolding, and it's a conversation that's unfolding. And I have a way of doing things that's different than you. Rick has a way of doing things, and we all are making contributions and allowing voices to be heard and stories to be told. And I think the unique thing that I bring to the table is that I, being an outsider, maybe can formulate and ask questions and give observations that others who are in the bubble may not be able to see or observe. So I think that, you know, I've been able to add to the conversation in a very unique way, and I'm very grateful to the church. You know, I'm very grateful for the access you've given me to church historian department, and I'm grateful to BYU for allowing professors from there to come on. And so, you know, this is just like really a cool thing. And yeah, I'm part of this community now, and I'm talking to the goat right here, the big shooter here. I'm sitting across from, and I'm having this conversation, and it feels perfectly natural. Like, and I even when you say, "What's it like to hear from God?" John, I told you, God showed me. I had this image of me doing this, so it's a fulfillment of prophecy.
You did. You prophesied that you would be on Mormon Stories. When I met with you and Chris Thomas for lunch.
Yeah.
You're like, God told me I'm coming on Mormon Stories. And I'm like, oh, did he?
Yep. Well, if Heavenly Father said that you're going to be on Mormon Stories, then I guess you'll be on Mormon Stories.
Is that what I said?
Yeah, you said that. I thought it was a great line. Yep.
And I love this. I love there being an ecosystem. Like, I wish there were 20 Mormon themed podcasts because, like, just with respect to Rick Bennett, you know, like, I watched his Shannon Flynn interviews to prepare for the Mark Hoffman stuff. And I got to interview Shannon Flynn eventually. And I watched your stuff with Thomas Murphy to help get ready for Rod Meldrum. And I listened to Bill Reel and Radio Free Mormon talk about Book of Abraham to help
with Dan Vogel
to help
or Rittner.
Prepare for Robert Rittner. Yeah. And Gerardo, you helped turn me on to Rick Bennett, and that helped us get Shannon Caldwell Montes or who did
Matt Harris.
Matt Harris. Yeah, Matt Harris.
And Rick he found Matt Harris. He brought him into the fold. Yeah. And I've had Matt Harris on. Thanks. So yeah.
And I love it. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. So it's like we're bringing other voices in. I'm trying to bring in undertold stories, people you haven't heard of. I've brought books to people's attention, brought scholars to people's attention that nobody's ever heard of that are being taken seriously now by other scholars. You know, I mean, that's the funny thing. I tell people, well, we might only get a couple hundred views, but Dan Vogel's probably going to watch you. Tom Murphy's going to probably watch you. I mean, I have some of the top minds and academics in Mormonism that are regular viewers of my program because I know why, because I hear from them or they comment on my videos, you know? And so I know that the people are paying very close attention to who I'm having on and the content of my podcast.
And you play a really important role now, Steven. That's why I dedicated 2 days to you, because some would say that a lot of those scholars don't come on Mormon Stories because I got too negative. But the truth is I got negative once the scholars stopped being willing to come on Mormon Stories. And for me, one of the main reasons they stopped being willing to come on Mormon Stories is because I got excommunicated. Right. And as soon as that happened, people who want to be friends with the church can't come on Mormon Stories. But that's a loss to the overall discourse. But faithful, you know, the Mormon Faithful podcast, they won't ask the hard questions,
right?
But they won't come on Mormon Stories. So you can ask the hard questions, but in a way that isn't, for some reason, doesn't elicit fear, you know, because you're a nice guy and you're polite and you're diplomatic about it.
And an outsider.
And an outsider that they want to curry favor with, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I still haven't had somebody turn me down. That's unheard of, right? And like even on Reddit, 95% of the comments on Reddit are positive. Though that probably won't last much longer now that I've been on here. But the general feedback that I've been getting even online has been extraordinarily positive from people. So I really feel like I'm performing some kind of service and of benefit to evangelicals and to true blue Mormons, to progressive Mormons, and all the other all the representations of the restoration. Like I say, all the voices of the restoration will be heard on Mormon Book Reviews.
I should tell you, Radio Free Mormon texted me earlier today and said, "Oh, you make sure and tell Steven Pynakker that I will come on Mormon Book Reviews, that he hasn't been ignoring you on purpose.
Okay.
He's just been busy." So
good. Looking forward to it, Radio Free.
RFM's coming.
Some people tell me that I actually have a better sense of humor than you. I don't know, but that's what I'm hearing.
No, you just blew it. Now he won't be. That's the worst thing you can ever say.
Like, I'm actually funnier than RFM? No, that can't be possible.
Call him dumb. Call him ugly. Don't say you're funnier than Radio Free Mormon. Now, them's fighting words.
Good. Hey, that should make for a good interview, man. So yeah, cool. Thanks.
Fun.
Appreciate that.
All right. So how do you describe what you think God is wanting you to do for Mormonism?
Well, like I said, the Lord told me not to make any plans. And when I say that, like I told you before, I'm a type A personality, right? And I still that's still part of me. And part of being a type A is that you want to be in control of everything, plan everything out. just be totally involved in all facets, right? And plan everything out. Look, where am I going to be 6 months from now? What is 6 months from now? What does a year look from now? What are my goals? All these things, all the stuff you're supposed to do, right? To be successful. And the Lord told me, don't make any plans. And that really freed me up, because it was almost like he says, I'll do the planning for you. It's like, okay. And he has been. He's been doing the planning for me. I literally have no idea what episodes I'm going to be airing next week or the week after that. I have no idea who I'll be interviewing a week or two from now. But I know I'm going to have a top scholar or a very interesting person that's going to be on in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know who they are, but I don't even worry. Like, it might be a Tuesday and I'm like, man, what am I going to do? Who am I going to do for Friday? And next thing you know, I'm talking to somebody and I got a great interview on a Friday night. So I don't even plan things out much more than a few days out. And it just seems to work for me. It's been a very liberating experience. So I really feel that on some level, God has to be playing a role on this. And when I say that, I have Christians telling me that, the ones that know and kind of understand what I'm doing. But I also have other people within the restoration all saying the same thing, that what you're doing couldn't be done unless God's hand was on it. Now, that's what they're telling me.
You're a man of destiny.
I don't know. The Lord said, make no plans. 6 months from now, I may not be doing this. And I'd be content. If the Lord just wants me to do this for a season and says, Steve, now it's time to move on, I'll say, okay, Lord, I'll move on. I mean, don't trust me. I want to keep doing this for a very, very long time. But I'm also open to the leading of the Lord and where he wants me to go. And so I just feel led of the Lord to do this. But I also feel like I'm liberated to the idea that I don't have to make any plans and he's going to make them for me.
Going back to your epistemology problem with Moroni 10:4 and feelings being truth.
Yep.
How do you distinguish between just the thoughts in your head and you interpreting God's communication, you discerning God's communication to you? How do you're saying, I don't want to accept Moroni's challenge because that's flawed epistemology. Mm-hmm. And yet somehow you feel certain that God's communicating with you. How does that work?
It partly is because before I was an atheist, I was a believer who talked with God. And when I was really connected with him, it was on a very personal level. And when I was really in tune with him, I would have similar success with what I'm having now, where doors would open up for me and things would just open up. So once I hopped back on Christianity, it was almost like he was waiting for me there to start talking again. And so I just started talking to him, not in the same way. I'll never have the relationship with God that I had when I was younger.
What?
Yeah, because it was much more intimate, much more personal. When you don't quit talking to him for 20 years and then you come back, it's a different type of conversation. And so I don't approach him the way that I did before. Because
he's not as communicative to you?
No, I just kind of feel like once I really rejected him and didn't believe in him, I now have a different view. I view things differently because
Do you think he's pulled away?
No, I think he was there all along. I think the whole point of this exercise is that all this time I thought I had left him and turned away. It was almost like that he was there the whole time. While I turned his back on him, he was there along with me during this entire journey. And that what didn't make sense at the time now starts to make more sense because in some sense, God's hand was involved in this whole process now. Now me studying Mormonism makes much more sense to me because it didn't make any sense why I would have been doing it. But now, because I threw myself in it, and even though I didn't believe in God, I think God still had a role and a hand in making it happen. Right. So that's just kind of how I see it. Look, and folks, the old Steve Pynakker, if he's watching this, I mean, I would be punching holes through everything I just said. Right. So I acknowledge that atheist. I acknowledge that if I got into it, I would do a better job arguing as an atheist than as a Christian. I could do better winning those arguments than as a Christian. So I recognize atheists. You can punch a lot of holes in what I'm saying. And I respect that if you want to do that, that's fine.
But you can tell the difference between God's voice and the thoughts in your head. How?
Because it's almost like you have this thought process where I'm just thinking like, about having dinner or all these things, or just having a conversation with you or whatever. And then now the Lord might just maybe show me a glimpse of something that I wasn't trying to see. It just kind of happened. And then maybe the Lord will like I said, he just said a few words to me early on in the process. He really hasn't said anything to me since. He just kind of said, okay, here's just a few things. Follow these things. Don't worry about what you're going to say because they're going to hear things you didn't hear before that you didn't even say. So in other words, he released me from the burden of trying to get all the facts right or the doctrine right or any theology. That just open your mouth, say things, and I'll direct where it's going to go. So that was one, and it seemed to be really good advice that he gave me because it seems to be working for me. And then the other about not making plans. So for me, the reason why I think that it's God is because what these words of advice and what he promised me has come true. It's been confirmed to me, right? So once I have a confirmation, then I have a sense that this must be something from the Lord, because he's confirming something that I wouldn't have been able to predict on my own, or I wouldn't have given my advice. This type A personality is not going to go and say, don't make any plans.
So basically you're saying by the results or the fruits of what you test, you're knowing if it's coming from God. So if good outcomes are coming out of whatever you felt directed to do, then you believe that must have been from God.
I mean, as an atheist, I would literally be foaming at the mouth right now.
I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense to me. I'm just saying that's how I'm just trying to.
I guess that's kind of what I'm saying, but I do also acknowledge the weaknesses in that position as well. I'm saying, I'm not telling you got to become a Christian, you got to believe in Jesus, or you got to do what I'm doing. I'm just saying this is what works for me.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to tell you, like when it's 2005 and I'm trying to figure out how to make a difference in this space, and I'm running or walking or whatever, and it's just like, it comes to me. It's like, you need to start a podcast.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? And then it's like, I don't know how. I don't even know, but I absolutely felt like I needed to do that. And then it's like, I guess I have to buy a mic, and you buy a mic and you learn how to edit software, and then then you're about to publish your first episode, and you're just like, do I hit publish? Like, really? And and then you publish it. And then like Richard Bushman comes on, and then like Michael Quinn comes on, and all of a sudden a gazillion people are reaching out. And I could say I had almost an identical experience.
Yep.
And at the time I was still a progressive Mormon, so I would have thought it's God,
right?
Kind of in quotes, meaning power, energy, or destiny or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm just telling you, I completely relate to what you're saying.
Our origin stories sound very similar, don't they?
Yeah.
And so I think it just should both give us all pause that, maybe this is God's hand. He's using you, he's using me, he's using all of us in this room. And he's using your podcast to bring me back to Christ. Right? The Lord will use whatever vessel is available to him. And I also think that you're open to being used because you have what I call a pastor's heart. You want to help people. So in one sense, you want to do good for people. And so I think God uses that, And so I think the Lord, it was a last minute thing when you were doing that interview with Christopher Thomas. Like, you weren't planning on doing that, right? Well, God said, make no plans, right?
He's like, I'm in town, John, and something had fallen through, I believe. And he's like, oh, I'm in town. And I'm like, all right, come on by,
Right. So it wasn't planned.
That changed your life.
Changed my life. Changed my life. That was the catalyst right there. And so I look at, I have a story. I didn't know that story about you, about that, but doesn't it sound isn't that interesting that happened to both of us, and that it kind of shows that maybe everything was all leading to us sitting down and having this conversation? Is that something you're open to as a possibility?
Yeah. And I have tingling going through my spinal cord right now. Like, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm not trying to say anything about that other than like, that's what my body is experiencing. Wow. But like, I also relate to this idea that, cause like you do a couple episodes and people start emailing you, and like now in 2022, people are like, John makes too much money, or, blah, 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 thrive and attack, whatever, all the attacks that come now. But like back in 2005, the idea that like the podcast would grow, the idea that I would have a lot of listeners, the idea that it would become really significant, the idea that I would be written up in the New York Times or be on Good Morning America, or like be an influence on positive change, let alone the fact that someday I'd be able to get a PhD, but then also not just support myself and my family, but then hire other people and then have like an organization. Like I would have never envisioned that. Never. But you just put one foot in front of the other and it grows. And so I can really relate to this idea that like I followed the voice and I just put one foot in front of the other, and it grew in ways I would have never thought possible. I'd have Jen here and Gerardo and you and a studio and 4 camera setup with lighting, with 100,000 followers and listeners. Right. It's a miracle.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to describe it.
I think so, John. I honestly believe that. I mean, I don't doubt for a minute that in the most nuanced way, because I still think like a Calvinist or an atheist sometimes. But I really think that there's something to this. I really think that God brought us here together. I think God planned it, timed it. He's behind this endeavor. And I think that just be open to maybe hearing another voice again soon.
What do you think, Gerardo? Is God behind this?
I like it. I like the idea.
You buy it?
I don't know right now.
Is this weird to hear us talking this way?
No.
No?
No, I really respect, I love Christians. Like I respect Sandra Tanner so much for her beliefs and.
Me too.
Yeah.
But dude, even with you, you're a closet gay, Mormon at BYU Idaho, and you're emailing me saying, John, I have a boyfriend and I'm at BYU Idaho. You know what I mean? And then you and Zach come to the retreat, and I would have never guessed. Would you have ever guessed? No. You'd be not only upping the game of Mormon stories, but eventually co-hosting episodes?
Yeah, I would never guess that.
Huh?
No, I would never guess that. I was a big fan, fine boy, like Steve.
It's kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
How about you, Jen? Did you ever guess you'd be here?
No.
Huh?
No. That's for sure.
Well,
what do you think about this kind of talk about divine or, God or whatever?
Yeah, I believe in a divine. I believe in God. I had a really hard time. Gosh, I wasn't going to cry on this one, John.
No. That's your brand. That's your trademark.
Because it was really hard for me deconstructing, because I felt, so I read the Book of Mormon, and I was all, what I called prideful. I was like, I don't need an answer, Heavenly Father, it's fine. I just know it's true. I don't need to do the little pray and get an answer. And so then I started feeling guilty. And so I went and prayed, and I said, I just want people to see the light in my eyes and know that I know it's true. Mm-hmm. And then a friend knocked on my door, went to the door, opened the door. It's my best friend from high school. She never stops by, but happened to stop by just for a second because she was on her way down south. And she's like, hi, it's okay. Gives me a hug. And she's like, I just wanted to stop by really quick. I have to go already. And she walks halfway down the steps, and she turns around and she's like, there's just this light in your eyes. Mm-hmm. And then she turns around and leaves. And it's the exact words that I just said in my prayer. And then when this whole faith crisis happened, and I just kept thinking, I'm like, what was that? What was that? What was that I felt? What was that she would say the same words to me? And it was really hard for me to because I felt like that was a connection with God somehow. And it was really hurting my heart. And because I couldn't see how that would be connected somehow. And so then this whole faith crisis happened. I went to the retreat with John last November, and then we connected with doing events that way. And then I was helping at a Thrive event, and I had a table, and I was there to like help promote like doing events again for Mormon Stories. And this guy comes up to the table, and he's talking to me for a second, and then he starts to walk away, and he turns around and he says, "There is just a brilliant light in your eyes." And he's like, "I came here, and people always say to me, when you leave the Mormon church, you lose this light in your eyes. I just want you to know you have that light in your eyes. I see it in you." And like, whoa, you know what I mean? And so I just feel like for me, there is a God. Somehow, I like to say God or divine somehow for me, that I feel there's a purpose for me to be in this space of Mormon Stories, whether that's to be here for women as they transition out of the LDS faith, or it's just something purposeful for my life at this time. I don't know. I feel divinely here for some reason. And so I feel that's kind of where I am right now. So that was a long story to answer that question, but that's where I am right now.
Interesting, isn't it? I know.
Are we at church? What was your term?
We were having church service.
Do we just have church?
I think we might have had church service today. Yeah.
I'm going to get some hate mail from
Atheists.
some of my atheist and agnostic friends.
I will too, probably. Yeah.
Look what you've done. You're holding church, Steven
That's right.
Pynakker.
That's right. This is what was supposed to happen.
Yeah. Well, I like that your conception of God acknowledges the problem of evil. Because any theology that doesn't acknowledge the problem of evil, if you're going to ever state that there's a miracle, ever, any divine intervention, if it isn't accompanied with an acknowledgement of the senseless brutality and tragedy of life, you don't have my attention.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. I think that there's senselessness and things that do not make sense, and that the problem is evil is a real challenge. I acknowledge that, and I grapple with that as well.
Yeah. Fun. Okay. So I guess can we ask you just some theological questions of how you've reconstructed your belief really quick?
Yeah.
How many minutes do you have left?
We got as much time as we need. I don't, we'll just keep going.
All right. So like, what is God for you now?
God is just I worship him. I acknowledge him as the creator of the universe.
Does he have gender for you?
I think that God is a spirit, so I think he has both feminine and masculine aspects. I refer to him as a he only because that's just the traditional concept of God.
But for you, God's not gendered.
Spirit to me is not it doesn't have a body, so I can't attach a gender to a spirit in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jesus as a historical figure that resurrected literally.
Yeah. So, Bart Ehrman will acknowledge that there was a man named Jesus who roamed and was a preacher and a teacher and was proclaiming that there would be a destruction of the temple. This is the basic belief that Bart Ehrman believes. So that would be like, it's a historical fact. We have an apocalyptic preacher, Yeshua, preaching and prophesying that the temple would be destroyed. The scripture tells us that he is God incarnate and that he came here to pay the penalty of sin. And he was a real person, and he paid for our sins at Calvary, and he rose from the grave, and he He's victorious over death. Death and sin has been defeated, and Christ is victorious.
So if Jesus is God for you,
Yeah.
then Jesus doesn't exist now. Jesus would, I don't want to say absorbed back into God, but like,
No, God, Jesus would see again. For me to try to describe Jesus in the concept of within the outside of our realm of understanding is any words I use are going to fail to describe. So as Christians, we believe that Jesus is at the right hand of the throne of God, right? So that's where, in one sense, the conceptually is where he resides at this time. So he's not reabsorbed; he's there with the Father. But again, these are words that can't even describe who Jesus is, where, and all that. This is just our best understanding of how we would understand Christ within a Christian concept.
because this is how Mormonism and even the Mormon temple ceremony kind of mocked traditional Trinitarian Christianity. Because is it one, but three, but one? And you're just saying it doesn't make sense.
I'm saying that I'm not going to describe to you the Trinity, because I will probably be describing you to modalism, not Trinitarianism, because it's a very complex thing. I will say I can recite the creeds and say that I'm Trinitarian, but also say that whether you believe in the Trinity or not, I don't think is a matter of salvation.
What would you think of the argument that Mormons like to make, that if you don't understand the nature of God and exactly how God is, and you're not able to describe how he like operates, and how, if, like you're saying, it's too complicated to explain. So basically, to a Mormon, that would mean like you don't understand the nature of God, or it's too hard to have a relationship with someone that you can't understand.
Yeah, well, the answer I have to that is that the concept of God within Mormonism, I think, is very limiting, because now you've put him in a body. I think that the second you really try to describe the God and try to give definitions and say this is who we know God is, you're making God small. So I think you're doing a disservice. So I would say, I'd rather say there's mystery, there's things I don't understand, but I'm not going to make these all issues of salvation. And if somebody goes and says, I know the nature of God, or I can explain to you who God is, I would be very suspect that a mortal human being could actually describe God.
Yeah. I like that idea, because really, I mean, I've never thought about it that way, but the Mormonism, the God that Mormonism describes is pretty reductive. So when you're thinking about Black people, when you're thinking about people in India, when you're thinking about Native Americans, and then you're thinking, well, if God has a body and then we're made on his image, then what does God look like? Does he look white? Does he look black? Does he look like a Native American?
Right.
So you start encountering really problematic theology, where like you're not able to reconcile a lot of questions, where like if you have a way more expansive view of God, it's like we don't understand it. He's just too big, great for us to really understand, but he loves us. You really don't have issues when it comes to transgender people, LGBT people, and people of color or other races.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, Geraldo. I appreciate that. I think that's good observation. Yeah.
I think that's the same God I believe in. I usually just say love.
Yeah.
God is love. That's scriptural.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I just have to throw this in. So there's been this conversation about Heavenly Mother, and like, if there's, even Rod Meldrum would say that Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother need their bodies so that they can literally create spiritual offspring.
Yeah.
But then the question is, do you need physical anatomy to create spiritual offspring? It makes no sense. But Mormons wouldn't really think that through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's
Is that a more powerful view of God, when it makes like almost no sense that you need physical anatomy to make spiritual children?
Yeah. Well, and God is transcendent. God is outside of the Mormon God is that God is more of an organizer of material and not a creator. And he's just kind of a higher species of us, right? and we're all kind of related to him in one sense too, within the pre-existence and all this kind of stuff. I don't know.
It makes sense barely makes sense on a superficial level, but if you scratch a centimeter deep, it all of a sudden makes no sense.
Yeah, I think only a transcendent God that's beyond our comprehension is worthy of our worship.
Yeah. Well said. Age of the earth.
Oh, 14. Oh, the age of the earth would be what 3.5, 4.5 billion years old? Yeah, the age of the current scientific consensus.
Okay. Adam and Eve as the first humans.
No, absolutely not. We can trace human lineage, 200,000 years ago. So we know that humans existed. Our ancestors existed for hundreds of thousands of years.
So no literal Adam and Eve for you, maybe.
I think that I'm still exploring that. Actually, there's a guy who has a Christian who believes in evolution, who came out with a book about Adam and Eve that I want to read and explore what he has to say about that. But I think there's something that can be said that I don't know if they're historical characters. I part of me is skeptical that they are.
Organic evolution.
Yep.
What?
Oh, biological evolution. I mean, look, God gave us two places to look for his direction. He gave us the creation, and he gave us the Word. And the creation, what science reveals about the creation is God's story. So if science is showing us evolution and all these things, and one of the other things I did when I studied atheism, I read everything I could about biology and science and educated myself on what natural selection actually is, what biological evolution it really is, and not a caricature that I was taught in a young earth creationist context. Then I realized, okay, I educated myself in science. I accept science, and I accept that science is describing God's creation, and we need to take that into account and integrate that with our scriptures.
Okay.
I want to know do you believe that Moses was a real prophet who wrote the first books?
You skipped the flood. You skipped Noah and the flood.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Noah's flood, there's flood myths in just about every single culture, right? It's like a universal thing, which was used by creationists to say, oh, look, see that happened. Well, I think that it's a common, there are certain stories and myths that are common to all of humanity. And reading the Genesis account, I remember even thinking as a little kid, is that really feasible that could happen? Like, this sounds more like a legend, like a myth than real literal history. So I think that, we just have to understand that the scripture can also be metaphorical. It doesn't have to all be literal. I think that there are places where it's obviously poetic and metaphorical. And I think that the idea of taking that story literally, it's not a feasible thing, and the evidence doesn't back it up.
And Gerardo, I don't want to interrupt your story, and I know you got to go, but I think your question about Moses applies to Abraham too. Even Jews sometimes wonder if Abraham and Moses actually existed as humans, right?
Yeah.
And Gerardo, you're taking off. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.
I'm going to say bye to Gerardo, and you're awesome. Thanks for.
Yeah.
We'll miss you.
Thank you, Steve. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks. You're awesome, Gerardo, and thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. You're doing a real solid coming out and doing this.
Thank you.
All right. See you, brother. Okay. So Abraham and Moses as real people.
As the story, the narrative unfolds, I think we start entering into the realm of real history. So I tend to think that there was probably Moses and Abraham. I think that I don't see why everything has to be a myth if it's ancient. I think that there could be some true stories that have been passed along that could attest to real people existing. Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're mythical people.
I mean, this is kind of like really interesting territory where you're like saying, okay, Genesis and Noah and okay, Adam and Eve, not so much. Mm-hmm. But then at some point it becomes real.
Yeah.
Like some would say, like a lot of Christians would say, that's a weak foundation.
Well,
you're basically denying a bunch of it, the foundation of it. And then all of a sudden it becomes historical.
Yeah, I think hyper-literalist people, people that, that it all has to be true for their worldview to work, are going to find it problematic. But I just think that I can look at the scriptures. I'm more of a New Testament guy, right? So I think that's where the real core message is. But I do think that when I look at Middle Eastern literature and other things, I can see parallels that parallel creation myths and stories that you could tell were being borrowed from to kind of create a narrative of how we got here to tell a story. So I just think that they were just adopting a typical Middle Eastern mythos to start the whole thing off. But then it does engage and encounter real history at some point and real people. Now, some people will say maybe it's King David is the first real person. That's just a matter of where you're at. But those aren't the things that make me a Christian. These are just the opinions that I have, right? So these aren't, whether there was a flood or not is not something that would be a deal breaker for my faith. But I just giving you my opinions on these things, where I'm at on these things. And it's in flux. I'm in flux on some of this stuff too.
And there's a rich Christian tradition that's like, you're taking the Bible literally? What? Nobody. Bible was never meant to be taken literally. Like, we have to acknowledge that Mormons don't have any generally understanding of any of this history, but there's a whole block of Christians for hundreds of years that are like, the Bible was never meant to be taken literally.
Right, including Catholicism, the biggest branch of Christianity will tell you that a lot of these stories are not, there's a mythos to some of this stuff as well.
So then the inerrant Bible?
I think all I would say about the Bible is I believe that it's the Word of God, but it has the fingerprints of man all over it. So it's directed by the hand of God, but the fingerprints of man are all over it. That's how I see it.
So all that genocide and barbarism in the Old Testament, what do you make of that?
As an atheist, I used to hang out with an Orthodox Jew, and we would just sit and talk theology for hours on end. And I liked him. He's a cool guy. And one day I asked him, I said, if you had the tools that the Nazis used at Auschwitz, the gas chambers and everything like that, if the Jews had access to that equipment when they were told by God to settle the Holy Land, would they have used it? And he said, of course. Of course we would have used it. That's not cool, right? That's not, that to me is like, and this is not a strike against Judaism, but I'm just saying there's some problematical stuff in the Old Testament that bothers me. And I'm sorry, folks, but the Old Testament and verses do endorse slavery. You know what I'm saying? So I acknowledge all the dark things in the Old Testament that I'm not going to try to paper over and pretend they're not there.
So those could have been the fingerprints of man, you're saying?
Yeah, I think that when I read, like, there's certain things that it's obviously like when you're reading Levitical text, they're writing down laws. How do you say that's actually scripture, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. That they're writing, it's like they're writing legislation, and that's supposed to be the word of God. I don't necessarily agree with that.
So when God says kill men, women, children, and animals in the Old Testament,
that's a tough one, dude, right? And is that the same God? I don't know. I mean, I have issues with God, and that's one of the things as an atheist, I would say, what the hell, God? Why would you command such a thing like that? So I still think I don't know the answer to that one. Is it the same God? I mean, obviously we as Christians are taught that it is, but are they writing literature to justify what they did and said they were doing it in God's name? Might be a better idea of how that we could approach that.
But you seem to be not sure about that.
Well, like I said, I'm still in flux on some of that stuff, but I'm just telling you, I would not use a lot of the Old Testament as a way to live one's life. I would never in a million years follow a God that would tell me to kill women and children.
Yeah. And animals. Yeah,
and animals across the board.
Okay. So, as far as, let's see, we've already talked about Jesus and so, resurrection. All right. I think any question? Oh, yeah. So historical criticism, you wanted to at least be able to briefly address Bart Ehrman and, cause there's a lot of Mormons that are like, oh, the Bible's just as fake or just as problematic as the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. I think I disagree with that. Yeah. I think at least there is a Jerusalem and there is a Holy Land.
The Bible's an ancient text. Universally acknowledged, the Bible is an ancient text and is recognized as such. That's a very strong argument in its favor, right?
So it's a stretch to say the Book of Mormon and the Bible are equally false or fraudulent.
Right.
But there are a lot that basically drop the Bible when they drop the Book of Mormon.
Right.
What allows you to keep the Bible, given the fact that you know about Bart Ehrman's work, about historical criticism and the documentary problems, with the historicity of the Bible?
I just think that, like there's almost this mantra. It almost becomes a creed. Everybody knows Matthew didn't write Matthew. Everybody knows Mark didn't write Mark. It's become like a statement of faith. Well, that's not actually entirely accurate. The idea is they later on attach these names to the Gospels, that they're anonymously written and we don't have any names. And hundreds of years later or whatever, they're given these names, right? And so the problem I have with that, and I think that there's something to the naming of these scriptures that tell me that there's probably an ancient direct source to a lot of these Gospels, is that why in the world would you choose Mark and why would you choose Luke as names that you would want to attach to a gospel? Why isn't Peter one of those authors, right? So that tells me that the fact that Mark and Luke are attached to those books indicates to me that there's probably a very strong tradition that they are indeed the authors of those books. Okay. So I just want to clear the air on that it's not all everybody knows. There is a strong school of thought that gives some credence that the fact that those two names are in there tells me that they're obscure. They're not the right kind of people you would attach to a gospel. The fact that they're not Peter or somebody more prominent tells me that they could very well be written by those people that they claim to be written by. That would just be one response I want to give to the people who think that they were all anonymous and we don't know who wrote them. I think an argument can be made that we might have, that each community, I was talking to Christopher Thomas about this the other day, each community would have a gospel, but to them, that's the gospel. And so they don't have to attach a name to it, but this is the gospel. And then they have another letter that's also a gospel. So now they have to start differentiating between them. But we have early on these gospels circulating, and that these communities were there, and this was the gospel. That particular, like Luke was the gospel, Mark was the gospel. There weren't gospels. And so I just think that there's an argument that can be made that these books were written by these people. That's just one thing I want to say. That just don't accept right off the bat because Bart Ehrman said so. That makes it so. There's some legitimate scholarship that would indicate that we can actually attach those names to those gospels.
Okay. What do you make of when the Bible says women should stay silent in the church? When the New Testament says that, when Paul I think says that, what do you make of misogyny in the Bible? People have given different theories on that and all that kind of stuff. And some people say it was just that particular congregation was having a particular problem with women and he was just addressing them. That's one argument. I also say that, look, I believe that we should engage our text and have conversations with them. And part of that conversation that we can have is that we are fellow believers, just like Paul is a fellow believer. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. And if I'm here on earth and I'm having a conversation with a pastor or a fellow believer in Christ and they make a statement, I would say, well, I disagree with that. I personally think that I can just say, sometimes I just disagree with Paul on that. I don't agree with you, Paul. I think women shouldn't be silent. And I don't think we should, when he was writing that, he did not think he was writing scripture. He was writing some of the pastoral letters, but he was writing letters to particular congregations for a particular time and place. The most important audience for these letters are the initial audience. Those were not written to us, they were written for us. And so then we can grapple with the text that was written, and I can grapple with Paul and say, Paul, I think you got that one wrong. You talked before about how even when you were a Christian, you still were able to find ways to feel okay with being gay and being a Christian. Now, as you're still gay and a Christian, what do you believe God wants his gay and lesbian children to do or not do? Is it a sin in your worldview? Does God consider it a sin for two gay men to be sexually intimate and get married, for two women to be sexually intimate and get married? Is that a sin in your view, in the way you read the Bible and the way you look at God?
Yeah, I mean, it's sin is such a hard word, and like it's an abomination, and terminology. But there are sins that are in the Bible that are considered sins, like a bacon double cheeseburger, and that's a sin. Within the same context of the condemning same-sex activity in the Levitical chapters. So you have all these condemnations, and this is an abomination, this is an abomination, and we eat shellfish, we don't follow these rules, and then also Scripture makes it very clear that divorce is wrong, and yet most Christians have the same divorce rate as the world, and yet we let them get remarried, and technically they're committing sin every time they have sex, right? So to me, we have to have freedom here and also compassion and grace here. So if those people, Christians who are divorced and remarried and having sex, are not committing sin, even though the Bible says they are, but most Christians would say they're not, then, except for the Catholics would say they're committing sin, then we need to make the same type of accommodation for LGBTQ people. We can't let them live by rules where we're not going to enforce the Bible on them, but we're going to enforce the Bible on them, on the LGBTQ community. So this is where we got to grapple with these things and have conversations with the text, and then also have conversations with people and hear their stories and see what works for them. I want you to live a life of integrity. I want you to have relationships that are strong and loving and ethical and are both healthy and are something that benefit you and your partner. And so to me, it's you live your life, you have your relationship with God, you work out with him how you're going to proceed with your life, how you're going to engage with other people. Some people say they want to remain celibate. That's fine. That's a choice. If you want to make a choice, but I'm never going to impose celibacy on other people. If people want to make a choice for celibacy, I respect that decision. But we have to make accommodations for people who love the Lord, who want to serve him, and also want to love while here on earth. And I don't want to deny people that opportunity to love another human being when we only have one shot here. I think that's cruel, and it's not living the golden rule.
So do you have an opinion about what God thinks about same-sex marriage?
I know that there's very little overall about homosexuality in the Bible. He seems more concerned about what food we eat than who we sleep with, which is interesting to me, right? So I just kind of think that God is so transcendent that I think that he's love, and I don't really understand him, but I'm trying to realize that I do have these scriptures that say these things, but I also have science, his creation, he also gave us. And I got to look and grapple with these things. And if science can tell us that there's the biology about sexuality and all these other things, and I mean, we even understand there's that if you're a younger brother, if you have older brothers, it increases the odds that you're going to be gay. I mean, it's so obvious that there's just certain things that are intrinsic. And so it's obvious if God is the creator, then he made them that way. Then we have to acknowledge that we cannot make that person live a life of celibacy. If they wanted to fall in love with somebody, as a human being, we got to allow people to do that. Even if you have religious beliefs that you don't agree with it, that's fine, but don't pass laws against those people. Let them live their lives too. Let them have the same freedoms that you have in a secular context, but also let them also be able to engage God as well, and don't get in the way of their relationship with God by hitting them over the head with the Bible.
And just to be clear, I'm not trying to force the issue. You believe God's okay with two men getting married?
I don't know if I'll ever get married, but I would certainly hope that I'd have God's approval when I do.
So you don't definitely believe that he's against it?
I think when we talk this way, we're making God small, right? And we're trying to make him more like us. And then we also are kind of making him into this type kind of person. And I don't think that's how he is. So I think that it's hard for me to say, well, God's okay or God's not okay with something. I think that if God is love, then he's going to be understanding of whatever choices we make. If we're doing something in love and we're doing something with integrity and we're doing things where we're trying to, follow him and have Jesus in our lives, I think God is going to look at the whole package and not just one particular thing that you do.
So God would be okay. God would say yes. Then.
Yeah, I think that I just don't like to put words in God's mouth, right?
But you believe in sin.
Yeah.
You believe that the sin exists.
Yeah. These are tough issues, John. I'm not pretending.
I don't. I don't believe that is. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't.
It's these are tough things. It's hard to say, like whether it's sin. I mean, these are very complicated things that philosophers and theologians have been grappling with for a long time. I'm just a layperson who just reads a lot of books, right? And I'm still working, like I said, and just so you know, folks, I have worked out my salvation with fear and trembling, and I respect God, and I believe in him, and I know there's going to be a lot of you that are going to go after me, but the Lord put this together. He orchestrated this. This is what was supposed to happen.
Yeah, if you believe that some parts of the Bible were man writing, then I would say the parts of the Bible that feel like love would be from God, and the parts of the Bible that don't feel like love would maybe be man. And so for me, I would say this is man. It's calling it sin. And not God, because it doesn't sound like love to me.
I kind of hinted to it yesterday when I was kind of giving that apologetic defense that John didn't want me to give, and that was how I talked about how when Moses went down and smashed the Ten Commandments, right, and then God forces him to write them with his own hand. And what I was saying was maybe the Ten Commandments that God gave us was much more grace and love based, but then Moses goes back up there and he has to write it himself, and he puts in works and law. He puts in man, and he takes the love out, and he puts the law in. Maybe that's the scenario that we could also contemplate as well.
It's not that I didn't want you to give it. I wanted you to give it now, which you did. So I'm grateful. Yeah. Okay. So those are my main Christian, I guess Randy Bell, and we had kind of a few rounds with Randy Bell because and he's a dear friend and I love him. It seems like he was wanting to say that it takes more faith to have an atheist than it does to be Christian, and that the evidence is almost overwhelming that there's a God. How do you feel about kind of that position that there's just tons of evidence that there's a God? And I'm not trying to throw Randy under the bus or put you against Randy. I'm just wondering if you are aligned with that kind of point of view.
Yeah. So we talked about Randy yesterday, and I had mentioned how this is a man that saw evil. He saw wickedness and evil, and that's what his job was. He went to all the worst sites, the nightclub shooting in Orlando and Sandy Hook and World Trade Center, and he saw evil. And the most obvious question to me that needs to be asked of a man is, how the hell do you believe in God? You hear tons of stories about police officers that walk into a crime scene as Christians and they walk out as atheists. How do you look at evil and still believe? I think that's just a fascinating thing about Randy, that he's been exposed to these things, because I don't know if I could, right? So I think that I just look at it this way. There is a problem of evil, and I acknowledge it. And so if an atheist looks at all the evidence and looks at all of creation, looks at the scriptures, and has a problem with has an issue with the problem of evil as a real problem with Christianity and the Christian God, I understand where you're coming from. And I don't fault you for thinking that maybe there isn't a God. But I also think that, God, or that atheism is also kind of a pursuit of truth. And atheism really is modern atheism is birthed out of the Western world, the Western society, in particular, Christianity, and most particular within Protestantism. And so I just want to say that when I look at it, like Christopher Hitchens used to say, I am an atheist of the Protestant variety. And so I just want to say that I get it. You're grappling with the problem of evil, but essentially atheists have taken one of the one example of maybe taking Protestantism to one of its logical extremes. So I just want to say to you atheists, welcome fellow Protestants to the fold. I consider you a type of Protestant, and I just want you to continue this journey of truth and pursuing these things. And I completely get why you might have an issue with evil, but keep pursuing, because you might be surprised. Something like what happened to me might happen. And I know you're mocking me and you think I'm full of it, and I understand that too, because I would have been thinking the same thing. But just consider what happened to me. That's all I ask. So Protestant, you're all Protestants, just like me.
Okay, here's how I want to end. I'm going to have you give you were an extemporaneous speaker at one point when you did debate, speech, and drama. I'm going to have you develop, is there anything else you want to make sure and tell about your story before we end?
I think my story's been told pretty well today. I'm really grateful for giving me this opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. Then we're going to end by, I'm going to ask you to give extemporaneous sermonettes to like 6 or 7 groups of people. Okay. I know that probably sounds weird, but go with me here.
Okay.
Is that all right?
All right.
Okay. If you were to give a final sermonette to an Orthodox believing Mormon, look in the camera, what would you want to tell them?
Jesus loves you, and Jesus died for your sins. I know you love Jesus as well. And this is where we can find the commonality, that we can have these conversations with each other, that we share Jesus. You and I may have different understandings of him, but I want to tell you that what Jesus did for you at the cross was he died for your sins. He died for you. He loves you. And I just want you to consider contemplating Jesus, making him the Lord and Savior of your life. And still, if you want to be a Mormon, that's fine, because I'm not here to proselytize. But I just want to talk that it's all about the love and grace in Jesus of what he did on the cross, and that allow him to operate in your life, and don't try to do everything on your own, but allow him to work through you. And I think you'll have some amazing experiences in your life.
Perfect. That was great. Okay. Mormon church leadership, First Presidency, Quorum of the 12, general authorities, top church leadership. What would you want to say to them? First
of all, I want to give all of you a hug and tell you that Jesus loves you. And I want to honor you, because in one sense, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a very most impressive organization. And so what you have built and what you have maintained, you are stewards to something very special. I obviously have offered critiques, but I do it in Christian love, and I reach out my hand in friendship to you. And I just want to say that I'm not here to attack or tear down. I'm just here to have a conversation with you and let you know that there are amazing, good things that you do in the world, but I'm going to call you. I will call out the church when I feel it's appropriate, but I'm going to do it in Christian love.
All right. That's 2 down. Okay. A Mormon who is in faith crisis, starting to question their beliefs, maybe still believing in parts of it, maybe not, just in the thick of the faith crisis struggle.
Call upon the name of the Lord. Jesus, help me. Jesus, save me. Jesus, guide me. Just don't throw all of it out. Hold on to Jesus. Grab onto him and follow his teachings. Look at the red letters in the Bible. Allow them to direct you.
What does that mean?
That's right. You guys don't have red letter Bibles. So all the verses in the Bible, and many versions of the Protestant Bibles have red letter editions, which is just the words of Christ in red. So
Jefferson, the Jeffersonian Bible.
No. Jefferson took out all the miracles.
Oh, sorry.
This is where
the words
of Jesus are in red.
Okay.
And so read the words of Jesus.
What Bible should they get? Because we don't have that.
So I kind of NIV, ESV are good publications, and King James Version is not the worst thing. That's fine too. Read the red words of Christ and just follow the teachings of the Savior.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So as someone who's left the church, probably atheist or agnostic, maybe a lot of my listeners are in this boat. They've not only left Mormonism, but they probably don't believe in God and Jesus, and probably are kind of skeptical about all that.
I get you.
And turned off by
Absolutely. Get it. Totally get you. Been there, done that. Totally understand where you're coming from. You have legitimate arguments that you have that need to be addressed. I would probably lose a debate to all of you because I understand many of the arguments that you make are pretty valid and pretty solid. But I just want to say that we also have to realize that there's a type of atheism that can be just as fundamentalist as the literalist Christians. Keep in mind that the reason why we are here is because our ancestors believed. If we did not believe in something transcendent and bigger than ourselves, we would not be here. We would not have survived. The human community is deeply spiritual, and don't turn your back on the spiritual nature of who we are. We are more than just animals. We are creations of this universe, and we do have the divine spark. And just remember that you have divinity within you because you are created in God's image. And realize that if you didn't have something spiritual in your life, and if your ancestors didn't have it, we wouldn't be here.
That one got you the most emotional way.
Because I think when I talk about the divine nature of us being image bearers, that's what I want to get across to people, that we're all made in the image of God.
But God's not a human. So what does that mean because Mormons are like, God's humanoid just like me.
Yeah, you're missing the whole point.
What do you mean?
We are image bearers in that we are part, we all have the divine spark of life breathed into us. That we are imaged after him in not a literal sense. So when we talk about the arms of God and we're just trying to describe the indescribable. We're just trying to relate it to us, right? But I'm just trying to say that when we say image, we're in the spiritual heirs, we're the spiritual children of God. It's not even something that's beyond comprehension that we could even see or think or devise. But when we say image, it's because we have the divine within us. We share, and that we're all part. We're because we're his children and his creation. That we have the spark of the divine in us. That's kind of a Quaker idea about having divine spark, but I think there's something to it.
All right, you're doing great.
Thank you.
What would you say to Mormon apologists? Either the classical ones or the neo-apologists.
Well, I would say that for those of you who are in the 21st century, and you're grappling with a postmodern world, and we're grappling with a world that's very quickly changing, I think it's very important that you believe your faith is very important, that you want to defend it, and I honor and respect that. But we also have to have integrity to the truth, and it's not about trying to make things fit in. What we have to, wherever the truth leads us, we need to follow, and we need to acknowledge it. I think the most important thing you can do, like I try to do, is acknowledge shortcomings and acknowledge arguments that are valid that the other side makes, and grapple with them. And don't just poo-poo them, because you're not actually having a conversation. You're just doing polemics. So deal with some of the issues that we have trouble with, and then be honest with with the members of the church. Say, this is my argument, but this is also issues that we can have with that. This is what I'm personally grappling with as an apologist. I'm still working it out. I think if you just took a much broader sense of what you're trying to do, and then just be honest with people about the facts, and don't try to sugarcoat anything or try to make things fit in that don't necessarily fit in, and try to create a narrative that makes people feel comfortable. Sometimes we're supposed to also make people feel uncomfortable with the facts and truth. And I think that's a legitimate thing, because I think telling the truth should make people feel uncomfortable. And if you're not making people feel uncomfortable, then you're not being truthful.
I have at least one more question, but this is just an aside. What do we make of the fact that you or Chris Thomas will come on Mormon Stories, but like a Mormon apologist won't? Why? How do we make sense of the fact that Mormon apologists won't talk to me, won't talk to ex-Mormons? You know what I'm saying?
I think it's too close to home. I think it's because Christopher and I are outsiders. We don't have a dog in this fight. When you're here, you have a dog in this fight. Even the Christians that are here, that are actively engaging, like trying to do the Aaron Shalafalov stuff and all that kind of stuff, they kind of have a dog in this fight. I don't have a dog in this fight. I just want to have engagement. I think that an apologist.
But they would still see people like me or people that listen to me as children of God. So it's kind of weird, right?
That
I mean, it's understandable, but isn't it kind of sad that they care about interfaith dialogue with you,
right?
But they don't want any interfaith dialogue with people like us.
And that's a real shortcoming. That's something they need to address. I think that they should have the freedom to come on this program and talk with you and debate with you and have open conversations. And I think that, look, I've been talking to John for 2 days now. He's not the boogeyman. He's very fair. And, talk to the guy. Let's continue the dialogue. John sometimes comes across a certain way and you get angry with him and pissed off with him. But, I just say, well, I'm going to let's have lunch. You're the one that offered lunch last time, but let's get together. Let's talk. Let's break bread. Let's have conversations with each other. Let's not just demonize the other person and not give them, just sit down and have conversations with John and maybe come on the program. I don't think there's any harm in that.
Okay. What would you say to fellow Christians and even fellow evangelical Christians ministering to Mormons?
Okay.
And ex-Mormons.
Yeah. So I think that one of the great disservices that I see with a lot of the evangelicals that are engaging Mormonism is that I think you're doing it all wrong. I think that you really don't know what you're talking about in many cases. I think that you have a certain point of view that you think is absolutely true and everybody's false. And I say that because many of you come from a hyper-Calvinist background. So I'm talking about Dr. White. I'm talking about Aaron Shalafaloff. I'm talking about Apologia Church, who recently opened up a branch here in Utah.
You're naming names.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to do that. But I don't agree with what you're doing. I think you represent a type of toxic Christianity. I think that what you're doing, in one sense, you could say, is pushing more people out of the kingdom than in, but you guys are all Calvinists, so you think we're all predestined anyhow. So my question is to you is, what is the point? If we're all predestined, then why do you even bother going and doing this stuff? Because God's already decided it anyhow. Why don't you? And then this is the other thing, you lack empathy. And why do I say that? If you really truly believe that the vast majority on this planet are predestined for eternal damnation, you know what your response should be? It should be empathy for people and feel bad that that's what their fate is, rather than attack them, make their lives miserable, pass laws against them. Why don't you, if you really, really believe this, that most of humanity is damned and that's the justice and love of God, then why don't you be nice to these people, because they have eternal damnation ahead of them, and you lack basic humanity and empathy for these people that you believe are predestined for eternal torture.
That's the spiciest I've seen you get.
Yep.
I'm going to be much more harder on my side than I will ever be to the restoration.
All right, Jen, any questions for Steve before we close up? Or comments?
No, I don't think so. I think this was really good. I really, really enjoyed your Mormon Stories interviews.
Thank you. Well, I got a bunch of people in Draper, Utah, probably waiting for me, and I think my ride should be coming. So I just want to thank you, John, for just having me on. This has been a really, I think that these were very important conversations that we had these last couple of days, and I really hope that to the audience that, I hope that, I probably misspoke on a few things, got a few facts wrong, and I'm going to be jumped on, but just think I came here in love and wanting to have real dialogue and conversation. And I want to thank you, John, for providing me the platform to do that.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's been wonderful. And please check out Mormon Book Reviews podcast and YouTube channel and support Steven and his ministry, because, even if you don't like I think it's beautiful, the belief in the Christianity that you're conveying. You're my kind of Christian, along with Chris Thomas and other friends of mine who I've named before, even John Hamer, right? But listeners and viewers, even if you don't like the religious part of what Steven talks about, he knows the history, and he's getting the best scholars and thinkers and interesting stories on his show. He's doing really important work. He's doing work that I reference, and I've been doing this a bit of a long time. So support. How can people support you?
Well, I have a Patreon page, and I just recently opened up a PayPal account that I hopefully will have linked up. So if people want to financially support me, they can go to my YouTube page and find links there. And I'll also try to get them on my website as well, MormonBookReviews.com.
We'll try and provide some links to that in
Thank
the show
you.
notes.
Appreciate it.
All right, Steven. Thank you,
Awesome.
brother.
Thanks. Thanks,
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Gerardo. Oh, wait, he's not there.
wait.
And thank you, viewers and listeners. I'll just really quickly say we couldn't do this without you. Go to mormonstories.org, become a monthly donor. We need your support to pay for all these services. We really appreciate those of you who do support us. And email us at mormonstories@gmail.com with your feedback or ideas. Comment, subscribe to all our different channels, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Subscribe, follow, like, comment, share. Give us positive reviews wherever you can. We have people who don't like us, who try and hurt us and lower our ratings and say hurtful things. So those are all ways you can support us in addition to becoming a monthly donor. We really appreciate all the support. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Love each other. And that's something we can all agree upon.
Amen to that, brother. Yep. We had church service today.
All right. All right. Thanks, Jen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys all again soon. Thanks, Chris. See you guys soon.